Hi everyone, welcome back to Midnight Crime Stories. I know many of you enjoy listening to these videos as you fall asleep. So before you drift off, I'd love for you to leave a comment letting me know where in the world you're tuning in from. And if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Alright, now let's get comfortable, relax, and dive into tonight's stories. Story 1. Tonight, as the rain falls gently guiding us through tonight's stories, we'll explore a mystery that has haunted the community of Sacramento, California for the past 2 years. This is the story of Maya Chen, a 28-year-old marine biologist, whose disappearance from Riverside Park on a foggy November evening in 2022 continues to baffle investigators and her family alike. Maya Chen was born on a rainy day in March 1994 in Sacramento, California. Perhaps it was fitting that someone who would dedicate her life to studying water would enter the world during a storm. Her parents, Dr. James Chen and Linda Chen, were both professors at UC Davis. He in environmental science, she in literature. From an early age, Maya was drawn to water. While other children played with dolls or video games, she would spend hours by the Sacramento River with her father, collecting samples and asking endless questions about the ecosystem. Why do the fish swim upstream? She would ask. What makes the water change color? Her curiosity was insatiable. Maya excelled in school, particularly in the sciences. Her high school biology teacher, Mrs. Sarah Rodriguez, still remembers her fondly. Maya had this way of seeing connections that others missed. She would later tell investigators. She could look at a drop of pond water under a microscope and tell you the entire story of that ecosystem. After graduating valedictorian from Kennedy High School in 2012, Maya attended Stanford University, where she earned her bachelor's degree in marine biology with highest honors. She then completed her master's degree at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography in San Diego, specializing in freshwater ecosystems and their impact on marine environments. But Maya wasn't just brilliant, she was kind. Her college roommate, Jennifer Walsh, describes her as someone who collected stray people the way others collect stray cats. Maya was always the one organizing study groups, bringing soup to sick friends, or volunteering at local environmental cleanup events. In 2020, Maya returned to Sacramento to work for the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. She lived in a modest apartment in the Midtown district, just a few miles from where she grew up. Her neighbors describe her as quiet but friendly, always willing to help carry groceries or water plants when someone went out of town. Maya had a routine. Every morning she would jog along the American River Parkway before work. Every evening she would walk through Riverside Park, sometimes stopping to feed the ducks or simply sit by the water and think. It was a ritual that grounded her, a way to connect with the natural world that had always been her sanctuary. November 14th. 2022 was a Tuesday, and for Maya Chen it started like any other day. The weather was typical for Sacramento in November, overcast, with a light drizzle that had been coming and going for the past week. The kind of weather that makes you want to stay inside with a warm cup of tea. But Maya had never been one to let a little rain stop her. She woke up at 6:30 a.m., as she always did. Her apartment was small but carefully organized. The walls were covered with photographs she had taken during her research trips. Close-ups of aquatic plants, stunning shots of salmon runs, panoramic views of Northern California's waterways. On her kitchen table sat a half-finished report about water quality in the Sacramento Delta, her laptop still open from the night before. Maya's morning routine was precise. Coffee first, always a single cup of fair-trade Ethiopian blend. Then her morning jog along the American River Parkway, a 3-mile loop that took her exactly 28 minutes. Her neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, would often see her stretching on the front steps of their building afterward, her long black hair pulled back in a ponytail, her face flushed from the cool morning air. At work, Maya was focused on a particularly challenging project. The Department of Fish and Wildlife had been monitoring unusual algae blooms in several Sacramento County waterways, and Maya suspected the cause might be more complex than initially thought. Her colleague, Dr. Michael Torres, remembers her excitement that Tuesday morning. She had been working on this theory about how urban runoff was interacting with agricultural chemicals in ways we hadn't considered. Dr. Torres would later tell police. She was like a detective following clues. That Tuesday she thought she had found a key piece of the puzzle. Maya spent most of the day in the field, collecting water samples from 3 different locations along the Sacramento River. She was methodical in her work, carefully labeling each sample, recording GPS coordinates, taking detailed notes about weather conditions and surrounding environment. Her last official act at work was sending an email to her supervisor, Dr. Rebecca Liu, at 4:47 p.m. The subject line read, "Preliminary findings, need to discuss tomorrow." The email was brief. "Dr. Liu, I think I've found something significant regarding the algae blooms. The pattern is more complex than we thought. Can we meet first thing tomorrow morning? I want to run some additional tests tonight at home." Maya's Dr. Liu received the email but didn't read it until the next morning. Maya was always finding interesting patterns in her data, she would later explain to investigators. "I assumed it was another one of her thorough analyses. I never imagined it would be the last communication I'd have with her." Maya left work at 5:15 p.m., stopping at the Whole Foods on J Street to pick up groceries. The security camera footage shows her selecting items carefully: fresh salmon, organic vegetables, a bottle of white wine. She seemed relaxed, even stopping to pet a service dog while waiting in the checkout line. The timestamp on her receipt shows 5:43 p.m. From the grocery store, Maya drove home to her apartment. Her upstairs neighbor, college student Derek Martinez, heard her come in around 6:15 p.m. She always wore these particular shoes that had a distinctive sound on the hardwood floors. Derek would later tell police, "I was studying and heard her come up the stairs. Everything seemed normal." Maya spent the evening working at her kitchen table, analyzing the water samples she had collected that day. She ordered Chinese takeout from her favorite restaurant, Golden Dragon, at 7:23 p.m. The delivery driver, Tommy Nguyen, remembers the delivery clearly because Maya gave him an unusually large tip. "She seemed happy," Tommy told investigators. "Maybe excited about something. She tipped me $20 on a $15 order and said she was having a good day." That kind of thing sticks with you. The last verified activity on Maya's phone was at 9:34 p.m. when she posted a photo on Instagram of her microscope setup with the caption, "Late Night Science Session." Sometimes the answers come when you least expect them. The photo showed her hands adjusting the microscope focus, several water samples visible in the background. What Maya did between 9:34 p.m. on Tuesday night and 8 a.m. Wednesday morning remains a mystery. Her neighbors heard nothing unusual. There were no phone calls, no text messages, no social media activity. It was as if she simply paused, but Wednesday morning would shatter the quiet routine of Maya Chen's carefully ordered life, setting in motion a chain of events that continues to mystify investigators to this day. Wednesday, November 15th. 2022 dawned gray and drizzly in Sacramento. The kind of morning where the fog hangs low over the river, and everything feels muffled and dreamlike. For most people, it was just another Wednesday. But for Maya Chen's world, it was the day everything fell apart. Maya's supervisor, Dr. Rebecca Liu, arrived at the Department of Fish and Wildlife office at 7:30 a.m., as she always did. She was looking forward to her meeting with Maya, curious about the significant findings mentioned in the previous evening's email. Liu prepared her coffee and settled at her desk, expecting Maya to arrive at her usual time of 8:15 a.m. 8:15 came and went. Dr. Liu wasn't immediately concerned. Maya was usually punctual, but everyone runs late occasionally. At 8:30 she called Maya's office phone. No answer. At 8:45, she tried Maya's cell phone. It went straight to voicemail. "Maya, it's Rebecca. Just checking in about our meeting this morning. Give me a call when you get this." By 9:30 a.m., Dr. Liu was genuinely worried. In 3 years of working together, Maya had never missed a meeting without calling ahead. She was simply too professional, too considerate. Dr. Liu called Maya's apartment landline. Yes, Maya was one of the few people who still had one. The phone rang and rang, but no one answered. At 10 a.m., Dr. Liu decided to drive to Maya's apartment. It was only a 15-minute drive from the office, and she convinced herself she was probably overreacting. Maybe Maya had gotten sick during the night. Maybe her phone had died. Maybe there was a simple explanation. Maya lived in a converted Victorian house that had been divided into 4 apartments. Her unit was on the ground floor, with a small window that faced the street. Dr. Liu could see Maya's car parked in its usual spot, a silver Honda Civic that Maya had bought used 3 years earlier. Dr. Liu knocked on the front door. No answer. She knocked harder, calling Maya's name. Nothing. She tried the door handle. Locked. Walking around to the window, she peered inside. The apartment looked normal, neat as always, but Maya was nowhere to be seen. Growing more concerned, Dr. Liu called Maya's emergency contact, her parents, Dr. James and Linda Chen, who lived about 45 minutes away in Davis. Mrs. Chen. This is Rebecca Liu, Maya's supervisor. I'm sorry to bother you, but Maya didn't come to work today, and I can't reach her. I'm at her apartment now, and her car is here, but she's not answering the door. Have you heard from her? The silence on the other end of the line lasted just a moment too long. No, Linda Chen said, her voice already tight with worry. We talked on Sunday, but not since then. Have you called the police? Not yet. I thought maybe. Call them, Linda Chen said firmly. Maya would never just not show up. Something's wrong. Dr. Liu called the Sacramento Police Department at 10:47 a.m. The dispatcher was professional, but not particularly alarmed. Adults go missing for all kinds of reasons, and Maya had only been missing for a few hours. Still, they agreed to send an officer to do a welfare check. Officer Patricia Williams arrived at Maya's apartment at 11:23 a.m. She was a 15-year veteran of the force, experienced in these kinds of calls. Most of the time there was a simple explanation. Most of the time the missing person was fine. But as Officer Williams would later write in her report, something about this case felt different from the start. With Dr. Liu's help, Officer Williams was able to contact the building's landlord, Mr. Harold Stevenson, who lived just 2 blocks away. Mr. Stevenson had owned the property for 12 years, and knew all his tenants personally. Maya, he said, was his ideal renter, quiet, responsible, always paid her rent early. She wouldn't just disappear, Mr. Stevenson told Officer Williams, as he unlocked Maya's apartment door. That girl is more reliable than clockwork. The apartment door swung open, and Officer Williams stepped inside. What she found was a space frozen in time, not disturbed, not ransacked, but simply paused. Maya's bed was made with military precision, hospital corners tucked just so. Her kitchen was clean, with a single coffee mug in the sink, the one from her Tuesday morning routine. Her work clothes from Tuesday were in the hamper. Her laptop was closed on the kitchen table, surrounded by scientific journals and printed research papers. But Maya's purse was gone. Her cell phone was gone. Her house keys were gone. And most puzzling of all, so was Maya. Officer Williams called for backup and began what would become one of Sacramento's most perplexing missing persons cases. Because Maya Chen hadn't just left her apartment that Wednesday morning, according to the evidence they were about to uncover, she had left Tuesday night, sometime after 9:34 p.m., and walked directly into a mystery that continues to this day. The investigation was just beginning, but already nothing made sense. Maya Chen, the woman who planned everything, who lived by routine, who never took unnecessary risks, had somehow vanished without a trace from the city she had called home her entire life. By noon on Wednesday, November 15th, Maya's disappearance had officially become a police matter. Detective Sarah Martinez was assigned to the case, a 20-year veteran of the Sacramento Police Department who specialized in missing persons cases. Detective Martinez had seen it all, but something about Maya's case struck her as unusual from the very first hour. Most missing persons cases fall into predictable patterns, Detective Martinez would later explain. Domestic disputes, mental health crises, voluntary disappearances to escape debt or relationships. But Maya didn't fit any of those profiles. She was stable, happy, successful. People like that don't just vanish. The first priority was establishing a timeline. Detective Martinez began by interviewing everyone who had seen or spoken to Maya on Tuesday. Tommy Nguyen, the delivery driver, confirmed his interaction at approximately 7:30 p.m. Derek Martinez, the upstairs neighbor, confirmed hearing Maya return home around 6:15 p.m. and hearing no unusual sounds after that. But it was Maya's phone records that provided the first real clue and the first real mystery. Maya's cell phone had been used to make one final call that Tuesday night at 11:47 p.m., more than 2 hours after her last Instagram post. The call lasted 8 minutes and was made to a number that initially puzzled investigators, the main information line for California state parks. At first we thought it might be a pocket dial, Detective Martinez explained. But 8 minutes is too long for that. Someone was on the line. The California State Parks Information Line was an automated system that provided general information about park hours, camping reservations, and trail conditions. But it also had an option to speak with a park ranger for emergency situations. The system logged that Maya had pressed 0 to speak with a ranger at 11:49 p.m. Park Ranger David Owens was working the night shift at the California State Parks call center in Folsom. He remembered the call clearly because late-night calls to the information line were unusual, especially on a Tuesday in November. She sounded focused, Ranger Owens told Detective Martinez, not panicked, not upset, but very deliberate in her questions. She asked about night access to several parks along the American River. Specifically, she wanted to know about Riverside Park, and whether it was legal to be there after hours for scientific research purposes. Riverside Park was a 23-acre green space along the American River, about 2 miles from Maya's apartment. It was popular with joggers, families, and dog walkers during the day, but largely deserted after sunset. The park officially closed at 10 p.m., but it wasn't uncommon for researchers to get special permits for after-hours work. I told her that researchers could apply for permits, but it usually took several days to process, Ranger Owens continued. She asked if there were any exceptions for urgent environmental monitoring. I explained that in cases of potential environmental hazards, researchers could sometimes get verbal approval from a supervisor, but they needed to file paperwork within 48 hours. Maya had then asked very specific questions about the park's layout, the location of water access points, the best places to collect samples without disturbing wildlife, and whether the park had any security cameras or regular patrols. She seemed to know the park pretty well, Ranger Owens noted. She mentioned specific landmarks, the old oak tree near the boat launch, the wooden bridge over Deer Creek. These weren't things you'd know unless you'd spent time there. The call ended with Maya thanking Ranger Owens and saying she would probably be out there early in the morning. The timestamp showed the call ended at 11:55 p.m. Detective Martinez immediately dispatched officers to Riverside Park. What they found there would deepen the mystery considerably. Maya's Honda Civic was parked in the small gravel lot at the park's main entrance. The car was locked, with no signs of disturbance. Inside, officers could see Maya's work bag on the passenger seat, the same bag she carried every day, filled with sampling equipment, notebooks, and field guides. But Maya was nowhere to be found. The park itself showed subtle signs of recent activity. Near the water's edge, about 50 yards from the parking area, officers found several small holes in the ground, the kind that would be made by someone taking soil samples. Nearby, they discovered a few drops of what appeared to be water on a flat rock, as if someone had been testing or examining samples. Most puzzling of all, Maya's purse was found on a bench overlooking the river. It was positioned neatly, not dropped or thrown, but placed deliberately. Inside were her wallet, keys, and cell phone. The phone's battery was completely dead. It was like she had planned to come back for it, Detective Martinez observed. People don't usually organize their belongings neatly if they're in distress or being forced to leave. The search expanded rapidly. By Thursday morning, over 50 volunteers had joined professional search teams to comb through Riverside Park and the surrounding area. They used trained dogs, metal detectors, and even underwater search equipment to examine the river. Maya's parents, Dr. James and Linda Chen, arrived from Davis and established themselves as the unofficial coordinators of the volunteer search effort. Friends and colleagues from the Department of Fish and Wildlife took time off work to help. Maya's former professors from Stanford and UC Davis made the drive to Sacramento to join the search. Everyone who knew Maya was there, her college roommate Jennifer Walsh remembered. She had touched so many lives. People wanted to help because they couldn't imagine a world without Maya in it. But as the hours turned into days, the search teams found nothing. No clothing, no equipment, no additional clues. Maya Chen had simply vanished from Riverside Park on a foggy November night, leaving behind only questions and a growing sense that something far more complex than a simple disappearance had occurred. By the end of the first week, Detective Martinez had to consider a possibility that no one wanted to face Maya Chen might not be coming home. While search teams combed through Riverside Park and the surrounding wilderness, Detective Martinez was following a different kind of trail, the digital footprints that Maya had left behind in her final days. In 2022, most people's lives were thoroughly documented online, and Maya was no exception. But what the electronic evidence revealed only deepened the mystery. Maya's laptop, still open on her kitchen table, became a crucial piece of evidence. The computer hadn't been touched since Tuesday night, and its browsing history painted a picture of someone who had stumbled onto something significant between 7:45 p.m. and 9:30 p.m. on Tuesday. After she had received her Chinese food delivery, Maya had conducted extensive research online. But she wasn't just looking up scientific articles about algae blooms, as her colleagues might have expected. Maya had spent over an hour researching historical land use records for the Sacramento River watershed. She had accessed county databases, environmental impact reports dating back to the 1980s, and even old newspaper archives from the Sacramento Bee. Detective Martinez brought in Dr. Rebecca Liu to help interpret Maya's research. What they found was a pattern that painted a very different picture of Maya's work than anyone had realized. Maya wasn't just studying current algae blooms, Dr. Liu explained as she reviewed the browser history. She was tracking environmental changes over a 40-year period. Look at this search: Sacramento County Industrial Permits 1985 to 1990. And this one, defunct chemical manufacturing sites, Northern California. The most revealing searches had occurred in the final 30 minutes before Maya posted her last Instagram photo. She had looked up property ownership records for several parcels of land along the American River, focusing particularly on a section just upstream from Riverside Park. One property in particular seemed to have captured Maya's attention. A 12-acre plot that had been owned by Cromwell Chemical Corporation from 1978 to 1995. The company had manufactured agricultural pesticides and industrial solvents before going bankrupt and abandoning the site. Maya had spent 20 minutes reading a 1994 environmental assessment report about groundwater contamination at the former Cromwell site. The report, buried deep in state regulatory archives, detailed significant chemical residue found in soil samples and recommended ongoing monitoring of downstream water quality. That's the missing piece, Dr. Liu realized as she read through the report. Maya wasn't just studying algae blooms, she was tracking the source of contamination. The Cromwell site is directly upstream from where we've been finding the most severe algae activity. But Maya's online research had gone even further. She had looked up current ownership of the former Cromwell property and discovered it had been purchased in 2018 by Riverside Development Corporation, a company planning to build luxury condominiums on the site. The environmental impact study for the proposed development, Maya had discovered, made no mention of the previous chemical contamination. According to the documents she had found, the development company claimed the land had been thoroughly remediated and posed no environmental risks. Maya's final online search, conducted at 9:28 p.m., just 6 minutes before her last Instagram post, was for the phone number of the Sacramento County Environmental Health Department's anonymous tip line. Detective Martinez immediately contacted the department to see if Maya had called. They had no record of any call from Maya's number, but the tip line supervisor, Maria Santos, provided an important detail. "We did receive an anonymous call late Tuesday night," Maria told Detective Martinez. "Around midnight, I think. Someone reported possible environmental violations at a development site along the American River. They said they had evidence of improper site remediation and potential groundwater contamination." The caller had refused to give their name but had promised to provide detailed documentation within the next few days. The call had lasted less than 5 minutes, and the caller had hung up when asked for contact information. "The timing fits," Detective Martinez noted. Maya makes her Instagram post at 9:34 p.m., then spends some time preparing her evidence. She calls the Park Service at 11:47 p.m. to ask about after-hours access for research, then calls the environmental tip line around midnight to report her findings. But why had Maya decided to go to Riverside Park that night? Dr. Liu thought she understood. Maya was a scientist first, everything else second, she explained. If she suspected illegal environmental activity, she would want ironclad proof before making accusations. She probably went to the park to collect additional water and soil samples from the area downstream from the Cromwell site. This theory was supported by Maya's text message history. Detective Martinez discovered that Maya had sent a message to her former graduate school advisor, Dr. Patricia Hoffman, at Scripps at 10:15 p.m. on Tuesday night. The message read, "Dr. Hoffman, I think I've uncovered something big here in Sacramento. Possible corporate cover-up of environmental contamination. We'll have definitive proof by tomorrow. This could be significant for both public health and my career. We'll call you Thursday with details." Dr. Hoffman had replied immediately, "Maya, be careful. If you're dealing with potential corporate malfeasance, make sure you document everything properly and consider contacting authorities before going public. Environmental whistleblowing can be dangerous." Maya had read the message her phone showed read at 10:22 p.m. but never replied. The digital evidence painted a clear picture. Maya Chen had discovered what she believed to be a serious environmental cover-up. She had decided to gather additional evidence under the cover of darkness, planning to present her findings to authorities the next day. But somewhere between her late-night research and her planned morning meeting with Dr. Liu, Maya had vanished. The question that haunted Detective Martinez was whether Maya's disappearance was connected to her environmental investigation, or whether it was simply terrible timing, a brilliant young scientist who had walked into danger while pursuing the truth. As the investigation entered its second week, Detective Martinez was beginning to suspect that Maya Chen's disappearance was far more complex than a simple missing person case. She was starting to believe that Maya had uncovered something that someone desperately wanted to keep hidden. Detective Martinez's investigation took a crucial turn when she decided to dig deeper into the corporate entities connected to the former Cromwell Chemical site. What she discovered was a web of connections that stretched far beyond a simple real estate development and raised disturbing questions about how far some people might go to protect their investments. Riverside Development Corporation, the company planning to build condominiums on the former Cromwell site, was not as simple as it initially appeared. Detective Martinez enlisted the help of white-collar crime specialist Detective Frank Morrison to trace the company's ownership structure. What they found was a complex network of shell companies and limited liability corporations, each owning pieces of the others in a deliberately confusing pattern designed to obscure true ownership. But after 3 days of financial detective work, they identified the principal investors. The primary backer of Riverside Development Corporation was Pinnacle Investment Group, a private equity firm based in San Francisco. Pinnacle specialized in distressed asset acquisition and remediation, buying contaminated or problematic properties at low prices, then developing them for maximum profit. The managing partner of Pinnacle Investment Group was a man named Richard Hawthorne, a 54-year-old former chemical engineer who had built his fortune by purchasing and developing former industrial sites throughout California. Hawthorne's business model was brilliant, if ethically questionable, Detective Morrison explained. He would buy contaminated properties cheap, do minimal cleanup work, then lobby for regulatory changes that would allow development to proceed. He had made hundreds of millions of dollars this way. But Detective Martinez's investigation revealed something more troubling. Hawthorne had a history of aggressive responses to environmental challenges to his projects. In 2019, a marine biologist named Dr. Robert Chen, no relation to Maya, had raised questions about a Pinnacle development near Monterey Bay. Dr. Chen had documented water contamination that he claimed was connected to improper site remediation. 3 weeks after Dr. Chen published his preliminary findings, he was found dead in his laboratory, apparently from a heart attack. He was 31 years old with no history of heart problems. The official cause of death was listed as sudden cardiac arrest due to unknown factors. Dr. Chen's research had died with him. His laboratory was burglarized 2 days after his death, with thieves taking only his computer equipment and research files. The Monterey Bay development had proceeded without further environmental challenges. It could be a coincidence, Detective Morrison admitted, but the pattern was disturbing. Young environmental scientist discovers problems with Hawthorne's development projects. Scientist dies under questionable circumstances. Research disappears. Development proceeds. Detective Martinez decided to contact Dr. Chen's former colleagues at UC Santa Barbara. What she learned made her blood run cold. Dr. Chen had confided to several colleagues that he had received threatening phone calls in the weeks before his death. He had told his research partner, Dr. Lisa Park, that someone had offered him $50,000 to revise his findings about the Monterey Bay contamination. Robert was scared. Dr. Park told Detective Martinez over the phone. He said people were following him, and that someone had broken into his apartment. We told him to go to the police, but he said corporate lawyers had warned him about the legal consequences of making unfounded accusations against major developers. Detective Martinez immediately requested Dr. Robert Chen's complete case file from the Monterey County Sheriff's Department. What she found was a perfunctory investigation that had concluded within 48 hours. No autopsy had been performed beyond basic toxicology, which showed no obvious poisons. The investigation had been closed when the coroner ruled the death was from natural causes. But buried in the file was a detail that had been overlooked. Dr. Chen's phone records showed that he had made a call to the California Environmental Protection Agency tip line at 9:23 p.m. on the night before his death, just as Maya had planned to do. The parallels were impossible to ignore. Detective Martinez later wrote in her case notes, two young marine biologists, both investigating environmental contamination connected to Richard Hawthorne's development projects, both planning to report their findings to environmental authorities, both disappearing or dying before they could make their evidence public. Detective Martinez decided to take a significant risk. She contacted Richard Hawthorne directly, ostensibly to ask routine questions about the Riverside Park development project. What she was really doing was fishing for information about whether Hawthorne knew anything about Maya Chen's research. Hawthorne agreed to meet at his San Francisco office. He was a tall, silver-haired man who projected confidence and success. His corner office overlooked the bay, and the walls were covered with photographs of his various development projects. "I'm always happy to cooperate with law enforcement," Hawthorne told Detective Martinez smoothly, "though I'm not sure how our little Sacramento project could be connected to a missing person case." Detective Martinez asked general questions about the development timeline, environmental assessments, and regulatory approvals. Hawthorne's answers were polished and professional, but when she mentioned Maya Chen by name, something shifted in his demeanor. "I'm not familiar with that name," Hawthorne said, but Detective Martinez noticed that his hands tensed slightly on his desk. "Should I be?" She was a marine biologist with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. Detective Martinez explained. She had been researching water quality issues in the Sacramento River watershed. Hawthorne's smile never wavered, but Detective Martinez caught something in his eyes, a flicker of recognition, or perhaps calculation. "Well, I hope you find her," Hawthorne said. "Environmental scientists do such important work. It would be terrible if something happened to one of them." The meeting ended cordially, but Detective Martinez left with the strong impression that Richard Hawthorne knew more about Maya Chen than he was admitting. She also had the uncomfortable feeling that her investigation had just become much more dangerous for herself, and possibly for Maya, if she was still alive. 3 weeks into Maya's disappearance, just when the case seemed to be reaching a dead end, Detective Martinez received a phone call that changed everything. It came from an unexpected source. Dr. Patricia Hoffman, Maya's former graduate advisor at Scripps Institution of Oceanography. "Detective Martinez, this is Dr. Hoffman from Scripps. I think I have something important about Maya Chen. She sent me an email on Tuesday night, November 15th, the night she disappeared. But I didn't see it until today because it went to my spam folder." Detective Martinez felt her pulse quicken. "What did the email say?" "It's not what she said, it's what she sent," Dr. Hoffman replied. "Maya attached a complete data package, water samples analysis, soil composition reports, historical contamination records, everything. She documented a systematic cover-up of environmental contamination that goes back decades." The email had been sent at 11:15 p.m. on Tuesday night, between Maya's call to the Park Service and her call to the environmental tip line. The subject line read, "Insurance policy. Please keep safe." In the email Maya had written, "Dr. Hoffman, if you're reading this, something may have happened to me. I've uncovered evidence of serious environmental crimes connected to the former Cromwell chemical site in Sacramento. The attached files contain everything I've found. If I don't contact you within 72 hours, please forward this information to the FBI Environmental Crimes Unit and the Sacramento Bee Investigative Team. The public has a right to know." Maya's data package was devastating. She had traced contamination from the Cromwell site through 15 years of water quality reports, showing how chemical residue had been systematically flowing into the American River ecosystem. But more damning still, She had uncovered evidence that Riverside Development Corporation knew about the contamination and had falsified remediation reports to obtain building permits. Maya had found internal company emails, Dr. Hoffman explained to Detective Martinez. Communications between Richard Hawthorne and his environmental consultants discussing how to manage the contamination data. One email specifically mentioned the need to ensure that local researchers don't stumble onto inconvenient facts. The most chilling document in Maya's package was a memo dated just 2 weeks before her disappearance. It was from Hawthorne to his head of security, a former police detective named Marcus Webb, instructing him to identify and monitor any local environmental researchers who might pose a threat to the Riverside project. Maya's name was at the top of a list of 12 scientists working in the Sacramento area. Detective Martinez immediately issued a BOLO be on the lookout alert for Marcus Webb. Webb was a 48-year-old former LAPD detective who had been fired in 2018 for excessive force violations. Since then, he had worked as a private security consultant, specializing in what he called reputation management for corporate clients. Webb's current address was listed as an apartment complex in Folsom, about 20 minutes from Riverside Park. When Detective Martinez and her team arrived at the address, they found the apartment empty. According to neighbors, Webb had moved out suddenly about 2 weeks earlier, leaving no forwarding address. But Webb had left something behind, something that would break the case wide open. In the apartment complex's dumpster, crime scene technicians found a bag that Webb had apparently tried to dispose of before leaving. Inside were Maya's field notebook, her sampling equipment, and her cell phone charger. But most importantly, they found a small digital camera that Maya always carried for documenting her research. The camera's memory card contained photos that Maya had taken on the night she disappeared. The images showed her at Riverside Park, collecting water samples near the river's edge. The timestamp on the final photo was 12:43 a.m., Wednesday, November 16th. But it was the last 30 seconds of video on the camera that provided the most crucial evidence. The video showed Maya kneeling by the water, carefully labeling a sample container. Suddenly, she looked up, her face illuminated by the camera's flash. She appeared to be listening to something, footsteps perhaps, or voices in the distance. "Who's there?" Maya's voice could be heard on the recording, barely audible over the sound of the river. The camera continued recording as Maya stood up, gathering her equipment. Then came the sound of multiple footsteps approaching through the trees. Maya's breathing became rapid and shallow. "I'm conducting authorized research," Maya called out, her voice stronger now but clearly nervous. "I have permission to be here." A man's voice could be heard responding, though his words were unclear. Then came Maya's voice again, more urgent. "I don't know what you're talking about. I'm just collecting water samples." The video ended abruptly, the camera apparently knocked from Maya's hands or deliberately turned off. Detective Martinez now had probable cause to arrest Marcus Webb for kidnapping, but Webb had vanished as completely as Maya herself. An FBI task force was assembled to coordinate the search for both the missing scientist and the man who had apparently taken her. But as the investigation expanded, Detective Martinez couldn't shake the feeling that they were still missing crucial pieces of the puzzle. Maya's camera had provided evidence of what happened at Riverside Park, but it hadn't revealed Maya's ultimate fate. The question that haunted everyone involved in the case was whether Maya Chen was still alive somewhere, being held against her will, or whether her environmental investigation had cost her everything. As the 4th week of Maya's disappearance began, Detective Martinez was about to receive one more piece of evidence that would change everything. A piece of evidence that had been hiding in plain sight since the very first day of the investigation. On December 9th, 2022, exactly 3 weeks and 5 days after Maya Chen's disappearance, a maintenance worker at the Folsom Dam made a discovery that would finally bring answers to the case that had captivated Sacramento and horrified environmental scientists across the country. James Rodriguez was performing routine inspection of the dam's overflow channels when he noticed something caught in the debris screen, something that didn't belong among the usual collection of branches and trash that accumulated there after rainstorms. It was a waterproof evidence bag, the kind used by environmental researchers to preserve samples. Inside the bag were Maya's final water samples, her field notes from that last night at Riverside Park, and a letter written in Maya's careful handwriting. The letter was addressed to whoever finds this. In it, Maya had written, "If you're reading this, then my investigation into the Cromwell site contamination has put me in danger. I've documented everything: the falsified environmental reports, the corporate cover-up, the ongoing contamination of the American River. This evidence must reach the authorities. The truth cannot be buried with me." The letter was dated November 16th, 2022, the early morning hours after Maya's disappearance. She had somehow managed to preserve her evidence even as her situation became desperate. But it was the final discovery, made 2 days later, that finally provided closure to Maya's family and friends. Acting on information from Marcus Webb, who had been arrested trying to cross into Mexico, investigators found Maya's body in a remote section of the American River, about 5 miles downstream from Riverside Park. The coroner's report confirmed what everyone had feared. Maya Chen had died on November 16th, 2022, from drowning. But the circumstances were far from accidental. Marcus Webb eventually confessed to his role in Maya's death, though he maintained that her drowning had been unintentional. According to his statement, he had been instructed by Richard Hawthorne to discourage Maya from pursuing her environmental investigation. Webb claimed that he had approached Maya at Riverside Park to intimidate her, but that she had fought back and fallen into the river during the struggle. He admitted to holding her underwater briefly, but insisted that he had tried to pull her out when he realized she wasn't breathing. Whether Webb's version of events was true would never be known for certain. What was clear was that Maya Chen, a brilliant young scientist who had dedicated her life to protecting the environment, had died because she had gotten too close to the truth. Richard Hawthorne was arrested 3 days after Webb's confession. He was ultimately convicted of conspiracy to commit murder and sentenced to life in prison. The Riverside Development Project was permanently canceled, and the former Cromwell site was designated a federal environmental cleanup priority. Maya's research became the foundation for new environmental protection legislation in California, and her story inspired a generation of young scientists to continue the fight for environmental justice. But for those who knew and loved Maya Chen, no amount of justice could fill the void left by her absence. Dr. Rebecca Liu still keeps Maya's final email in her inbox, a reminder of her colleagues' courage and dedication. Maya's parents established a scholarship in her name for young environmental scientists, ensuring that her passion for protecting the natural world would live on. And sometimes, on foggy November nights in Sacramento, joggers along the American River Parkway report seeing a young woman with long black hair kneeling by the water's edge, carefully collecting samples and taking notes. Whether it's memory, imagination, or something more, those who knew Maya like to think that she's still out there, still watching over the waters she loved so much. Maya Chen's story reminds us that the search for truth can be dangerous, but it's a search that must continue. In a world where corporate interests often overshadow environmental protection, we need more people like Maya, people willing to ask difficult questions and pursue uncomfortable answers, even when doing so puts them at risk. The mystery of what happened to Maya Chen has been solved, but her legacy continues, and perhaps that's the most important truth of all. Thank you for joining me tonight as we explored the case of Maya Chen. Her story may be tragic, but her courage and dedication to protecting our environment should inspire us all. If you're still awake and listening, please don't forget to comment where you're listening from and the current time in your corner of the world. Also, be sure to like this video and subscribe if you haven't already, so you don't miss our daily true crime stories for sleep. Now let's move on to our next story. Story 2. This story takes us to Cedar Ridge, Texas. Population 3,847, nestled in the rolling hills about an hour southeast of Austin. It's the kind of place where the local diner still serves coffee for $1, where the high school graduation is the biggest event of the year, and where a mystery like the one I'm about to tell you simply wasn't supposed to happen. The strange disappearance of James Jimmy Caldwell, a 34-year-old veterinarian, whose vanishing on a humid August night in 2024 has left an entire community questioning everything they thought they knew about their peaceful little town. Cedar Ridge sits like a postcard from a simpler time, where the biggest building is the grain elevator that's been standing since 1952, and where the newest business is a Dollar General that opened 5 years ago to much local debate. Main Street runs exactly 6 blocks, flanked by buildings that house Miller's Hardware, Betty's Cut and Curl, the Cedar Ridge Cafe, and the post office where Martha Webb has sorted mail for 23 years. Dr. James Caldwell had been part of this fabric for nearly a decade. He'd arrived in Cedar Ridge in 2015, fresh out of veterinary school at Texas AANDM, drawn not by high-paying opportunities, but by something harder to define, but the appeal of a place where your work mattered, where you knew every dog by name and every farmer by their troubles. Jimmy, as everyone called him, had grown up in Houston, but you'd never know it from watching him work. He had a way with animals that seemed almost mystical to the local farmers. Cattle that refused to cooperate for other vets would stand calmly for Jimmy. Horses with behavioral problems would gentle under his touch. Even the meanest barn cats would purr when he examined them. Jimmy had what my grandfather used to call the gift, said Eleanor Martinez, whose family ranch had relied on Jimmy's services for years. Some people are just born understanding animals. Jimmy was one of those people. The Cedar Ridge Veterinary Clinic occupied a converted house on Elm Street, painted white with green shutters, surrounded by old oak trees that provided blessed shade during the brutal Texas summers. Jimmy lived in the apartment above the clinic, a practical arrangement that meant he was always available for emergencies. And in rural Texas, animal emergencies didn't follow business hours. Jimmy's routine was as predictable as the sunrise. He arrived downstairs at his clinic every morning at 7 a.m. sharp, coffee in hand, usually wearing jeans and boots that had seen better days but were broken in just right for a day of large animal work. He'd spend the morning on scheduled appointments, vaccinations, wellness checks, the occasional surgery. Afternoons were often dedicated to farm calls, driving his white pickup truck to ranches scattered across 3 counties. But Jimmy wasn't all work. He played guitar at the monthly community center gatherings, volunteered at the annual livestock show, and had been quietly dating Sarah Chen, the town's only pharmacist, for about 2 years. Sarah had moved to Cedar Ridge from Dallas, drawn by the slower pace and lower cost of living, and she and Jimmy had bonded over being transplants trying to build lives in small-town Texas. Jimmy was the steadiest person I ever knew, Sarah would later tell investigators. He was never late, never forgot an appointment, never broke a promise. If Jimmy said he'd be somewhere at a certain time, he was there 5 minutes early. This reliability made what happened on August 15, 2024, so completely baffling. August 15, 2024. Dawned hot and humid, typical for East Texas in the middle of summer. The temperature was already 78 degrees at sunrise, with the promise of reaching 102 by afternoon. Jimmy arrived at his clinic right on schedule, unlocking the front door and switching on the lights that illuminated the small waiting room with its mismatched chairs and walls covered in photos of grateful pets. His first appointment was at 8 a.m. mass routine vaccinations for the Patterson family's 3 dogs. Mrs. Patterson later remembered Jimmy seeming perfectly normal, chatting about the weather and asking about her grandson's Little League season. He'd scheduled a light morning, knowing he had a big farm call that afternoon at the Riverside Ranch, where he needed to pregnancy check about 40 head of cattle. Around 10 a.m., Jimmy received a phone call that his receptionist, Maria Santos, would later describe to police as unusual. Maria had worked for Jimmy for 4 years and knew his patterns well. Most calls to the clinic were either scheduled appointments or farm emergency calls, straightforward, professional conversations. This call was different. Maria could only hear Jimmy's side of the conversation, but what she heard puzzled her. He kept saying, "Are you sure? And when did this happen?" Maria recalled. Then he got very quiet and just listened for a long time. At the end, he said, "I'll take care of it," in this serious voice I'd never heard him use before. After the call, Jimmy seemed distracted. He completed his morning appointments competently. Jimmy was too professional to let personal matters interfere with animal care. But Maria noticed he kept checking his phone and seemed to be thinking about something else. At noon, Jimmy told Maria he was going to grab lunch at the Cedar Ridge Cafe before heading out to Riverside Ranch. This was normal. Jimmy often ate at the cafe, where Betty Morrison served the kind of home cooking that reminded him of his grandmother's kitchen back in Houston. Betty Morrison had been running the Cedar Ridge Cafe for 15 years, and she prided herself on knowing every customer's usual order. Jimmy always got the chicken fried steak with mashed potatoes and green beans, sweet tea, and a slice of buttermilk pie if she'd made it fresh that morning. But on August 15th, Jimmy broke pattern. He ordered just a cup of coffee and sat in the corner booth, constantly checking his phone. Betty later told investigators that Jimmy seemed worried about something and kept looking out the window toward Main Street. "I asked him if everything was all right," Betty remembered. "He just said he had a lot on his mind and apologized for being distracted." Jimmy was always polite, even when something was bothering him. Jimmy left the cafe around 12:45 p.m., telling Betty he'd see her tomorrow, a promise he wouldn't keep. He walked the 2 blocks back to his clinic, where Maria saw him gathering supplies for the afternoon farm call. Large animal pregnancy checks required specific equipment: ultrasound machine, gloves, lubricant, and pregnancy test strips. At 1:15 p.m., Jimmy loaded his truck with the afternoon supplies and told Maria he'd be back around 5 p.m. Riverside Ranch was about 20 minutes away, and 40 pregnancy checks usually took about 3 hours, including paperwork and consultation with the ranch manager. "Drive safe," Maria called out as Jimmy climbed into his truck. It was something she always said, a small ritual of workplace friendship. Jimmy waved and smiled, looking like himself again for just a moment. It was the last time anyone in Cedar Ridge saw Dr. James Caldwell. Riverside Ranch sprawled across 2,400 acres of rolling pasture land and wooded creek bottoms, owned by the Hartley family for 3 generations. Ranch manager Tom Hartley had worked with Jimmy on dozens of cattle calls over the years, and considered the young vet not just a professional contact, but a friend. Tom was waiting in the main barn at 1:30 p.m. when Jimmy was supposed to arrive. By 1:45, he started checking the ranch road for Jimmy's familiar white pickup. By 2 p.m., Tom was getting concerned. Jimmy was never late, especially not for big jobs like pregnancy checking an entire herd. Tom called Jimmy's cell phone. It went straight to voicemail. "Hey Jimmy, it's Tom at Riverside. Just checking to see if you're running late or having truck trouble. Give me a call when you get this." By 2:30 p.m., Tom called the veterinary clinic. Maria Santos answered, sounding increasingly worried herself. "He left here right on time," Maria told Tom. "Said he'd be there by 1:30. I've been trying to call him too, but his phone goes straight to voicemail." Tom decided to drive the route Jimmy would have taken from town to the ranch. Farm Road 1847 was a 2-lane blacktop that wound through pine forests and open pastures, with few houses and even fewer businesses. It was the kind of road where a breakdown or accident could leave someone stranded for hours. About halfway between Cedar Ridge and Riverside Ranch, Tom found Jimmy's truck. The white Ford F-250 was pulled off on the shoulder, parked neatly as if Jimmy had simply stopped to make a phone call. The engine was off, keys still in the ignition. Jimmy's veterinary supplies were still loaded in the back, untouched. His coffee cup sat in the center console, still half full, but Jimmy was nowhere to be found. Tom called 911 immediately. Cedar Ridge had its own police department, but it consisted of just 3 officers and a chief, so the Caldwell County Sheriff's Department took the lead on the investigation. Deputy Sheriff Lisa Rodriguez arrived at the scene within 20 minutes, followed shortly by Sheriff Mike Thompson himself. "In 20 years of law enforcement, I've seen a lot of strange things," Sheriff Thompson would later reflect. But finding an abandoned vehicle with no signs of struggle, no evidence of foul play, and no logical explanation for why someone would just walk away, that stays with you. The initial scene investigation revealed few clues. Jimmy's truck showed no signs of mechanical problems. The doors were unlocked, which wasn't unusual in rural Texas, where many people still didn't lock their vehicles. His wallet was in the glove compartment, containing $247 in cash and all his credit cards. His cell phone was missing. Most puzzling was the location itself. The truck was parked along a straight stretch of road with clear visibility in both directions. There were no intersecting roads nearby, no buildings, no reason for Jimmy to have stopped there unless he'd experienced a mechanical problem or received an urgent phone call. A search of the immediate area found no trace of Jimmy. The roadside ditches were empty except for the usual rural debris: beer cans, fast food wrappers, and the occasional hubcap. The fence line separated the road from a pasture where cattle grazed peacefully, showing no signs of disturbance. As news of Jimmy's disappearance spread through Cedar Ridge, volunteers began arriving at the scene. By evening, more than 50 people had joined the search, including farmers with tractors and all-terrain vehicles, members of the volunteer fire department, and neighbors who had simply closed their businesses early to help look for the missing veterinarian. "Jimmy had helped every one of us at some point," said hardware store owner Bill Miller. "When your animals are in trouble and you call the vet, it doesn't matter if it's Christmas morning or the middle of a thunderstorm. Jimmy would come. We owed it to him to look for him with the same dedication. The search continued until well after dark, using flashlights and vehicle headlights to scan the ditches, creek beds, and wooded areas near where Jimmy's truck had been found. They found nothing. The next morning brought Texas Department of Public Safety investigators to Cedar Ridge, along with a K-9 unit from Austin. The German Shepherd named Rex was trained in tracking missing persons, and his handler, Officer Patricia Vega, had successfully located dozens of lost hikers, runaway children, and Alzheimer's patients over her 10-year career. Rex immediately picked up Jimmy's scent from items taken from his apartment above the clinic. The dog led investigators from Jimmy's truck along the roadside for about 50 yards, then stopped at a gate leading into the pasture. The trail went cold there, as if Jimmy had simply vanished into thin air. "Dogs don't lie," Officer Vega explained to the assembled searchers. "Rex tracked Jimmy's scent to that gate, then lost it completely. Either Jimmy got into a vehicle at that point, or something happened that eliminated his scent trail." The investigation expanded to include Jimmy's personal life, something that made the tight-knit community of Cedar Ridge uncomfortable. Sheriff Thompson knew that most missing person cases involved domestic disputes, financial problems, or other personal issues, but probing into Jimmy's private affairs felt like a violation of the trust the community had placed in their beloved veterinarian. Financial records revealed nothing suspicious. Jimmy had a modest savings account, no unusual debts, and no large transactions in the weeks before his disappearance. His student loans from veterinary school were current, his business was profitable, and he had no gambling debts or other financial pressures that might motivate someone to disappear voluntarily. Interviews with friends and colleagues painted a picture of a content, stable man with no apparent reason to abandon his life. Jimmy loved his work, was committed to his relationship with Sarah Chen, and had been making plans for the future. He'd recently talked about expanding his practice, and had put a deposit down on a small ranch he hoped to buy the following year. The idea that Jimmy would just walk away from his life is ridiculous, Sarah told investigators through tears. "We'd been talking about getting engaged. He'd shown me the ring he wanted to buy. Jimmy was building a life here, not running from one." The mysterious phone call Jimmy had received that morning became a focus of the investigation. Phone records showed the call had come from a prepaid cell phone that had been purchased with cash at a Walmart in Austin 3 days earlier. The phone had made only one call to Jimmy's clinic, and had gone silent immediately afterward. "Burner phones are almost always bad news in missing person cases," explained DPS investigator Carol Martinez, who had been called in specifically because of her experience with complex disappearances. "Someone wanted to contact Jimmy without being traced. The question is whether Jimmy knew the caller, or if this was something more sinister." The investigation team attempted to track the prepaid phone's movements using cell tower data, but the phone had apparently been turned off immediately after the call to Jimmy's clinic. Walmart security cameras from 3 days earlier were reviewed, but the person who purchased the phone had paid cash and kept their face turned away from the cameras. Clearly someone who knew how to avoid identification. Meanwhile, the search for Jimmy continued. Volunteer teams combed through hundreds of acres of countryside, checking old wells, abandoned buildings, and creek beds. Helicopter searches covered thousands more acres, looking for any sign of clothing, disturbance, or worse. Local farmers granted permission for searchers to examine their property, and many joined the effort themselves. The Texas Rangers were called in after the first week, bringing additional resources and expertise to what was becoming one of the most puzzling missing person cases in the region's recent history. Ranger Captain David Stone had worked similar cases across the state, but he admitted that Jimmy's disappearance had unusual elements. Most people who disappear voluntarily leave some kind of trail: missed credit card use, phone calls, sightings by witnesses, Captain Stone explained. People who disappear involuntarily usually leave evidence of struggle or foul play. Jimmy's case has neither. It's like he simply ceased to exist at that gate, on Farm Road 1847. As the investigation stretched into its second week, certain uncomfortable truths about Cedar Ridge began to surface. Small towns have a way of keeping secrets, and Jimmy's disappearance had stirred up sediment that had been settled for years. The first revelation came from an unexpected source: Jimmy's banking records, which investigators had examined more thoroughly. While Jimmy's personal finances were clean, his business accounts showed some irregularities that hadn't been immediately apparent. Over the past year, Jimmy had been receiving payments from a company called Hill Country Consulting, payments that weren't connected to any veterinary services he provided. Hill Country Consulting turned out to be a shell company, with an address that led to a mailbox service in Austin. The payments to Jimmy totaled nearly $30,000 over 12 months, always in round numbers, $2,500 exactly, deposited on the 15th of each month. That's not how veterinary services are typically billed, noted forensic accountant Jennifer Walsh, who had been brought in to analyze Jimmy's financial records. Vet bills are usually odd amounts, $127.50 for a vaccination, $85.75 for an office visit. These payments look more like a salary or retainer. The discovery prompted investigators to dig deeper into Jimmy's activities during the year before his disappearance. What they found was a pattern of trips that didn't match his known schedule. According to his appointment book and Maria's records, Jimmy should have been at his clinic or on local farm calls, but his truck's GPS system told a different story. Jimmy had been making regular trips to Austin, Houston, and even Dallas, trips that lasted overnight and weren't reflected in his official schedule. He'd been careful about it, always arranging coverage for emergencies and never missing scheduled appointments, but the pattern was clear. Jimmy had been living a double life. Sarah Chen was devastated by this revelation. "I thought I knew Jimmy completely," she told investigators. "We talked every night. We spent most of our free time together. I don't understand how he could have been making all these trips without me knowing." The investigation into Hill Country Consulting led to another shell company, then another, creating a paper trail that wound through multiple states and seemed designed to obscure the true source of the payments. Financial investigators eventually traced the money back to a legitimate business, Apex Agricultural Solutions, a large corporation that provided consulting services to factory farms and agricultural operations across the Southwest. Apex Agricultural Solutions, it turned out, had been hiring veterinarians to conduct quiet inspections of factory farms, looking for animal welfare violations that could create legal liability. The work paid well but required absolute confidentiality. If word got out that a farm was being investigated, it could destroy business relationships and trigger lawsuits. Dr. Caldwell was one of our most reliable consultants, admitted Apex CEO Robert Harrison when contacted by investigators. He had an excellent eye for animal welfare issues and was completely trustworthy. We're as shocked as anyone by his disappearance. But this revelation raised new questions. Had Jimmy discovered something during one of his consulting jobs that put him in danger? Were the mysterious phone call and his subsequent disappearance connected to his work for Apex? Investigators began reviewing the factory farms Jimmy had inspected over the past year. Most were large operations with minimal violations, the kind of routine inspections that generated paperwork, but little controversy. But one farm stood out, Lone Star Livestock, a massive cattle operation in East Texas that Jimmy had visited just 2 weeks before his disappearance. Jimmy's report on Lone Star Livestock was damning. He'd found evidence of systematic animal abuse, unsafe conditions, and violations of federal animal welfare regulations. The kind of report that could shut down a multi-million-dollar operation and result in criminal charges against the owners. That report was a bombshell, explained agricultural law attorney Maria Santos, no relation to Jimmy's receptionist. If it had been filed with federal regulators, Lone Star Livestock would have faced massive fines and possible criminal prosecution. That's the kind of thing that gives people powerful motives. The investigation into Lone Star Livestock revealed an operation much different from the small family farms that surrounded Cedar Ridge. Owned by a consortium of investors based in Dallas, the facility processed thousands of cattle monthly, with an annual revenue estimated in the tens of millions of dollars. Jimmy's inspection report, completed just 2 weeks before his disappearance, read like a catalog of horrors. Cattle kept in overcrowded conditions without adequate water. Sick animals not receiving proper veterinary care. Workers using electric prods excessively, causing unnecessary stress and injury. The kind of systematic problems that suggested management prioritized profit over animal welfare. But there was something else in Jimmy's report that caught investigators' attention. A handwritten note in the margin that read, "Ask RH about the South Pasture situation." RH appeared to refer to Robert Harrison, the CEO of Apex Agricultural Solutions, who had hired Jimmy as a consultant. When questioned about the note, Harrison became visibly uncomfortable. Jimmy mentioned seeing something in the South Pasture that concerned him, Harrison admitted. but he didn't want to put it in his official report until he could investigate further. What kind of something? Pressed investigator Martinez. Harrison hesitated before answering. Jimmy thought he saw evidence that cattle had been buried on the property without proper reporting to state authorities. If true, it could indicate that Lone Star was disposing of diseased animals illegally. This revelation opened an entirely new avenue of investigation. Illegal disposal of livestock carcasses wasn't just an animal welfare issue. It was a public health hazard that could contaminate groundwater and spread disease. It was the kind of violation that could result in federal criminal charges and massive civil penalties. More importantly, it was the kind of secret that people might kill to protect. DPS investigators requested a search warrant for Lone Star Livestock, but the company's lawyers immediately filed motions to block the search. The legal battle stretched on for days while Jimmy remained missing, prompting Sheriff Thompson to pursue other leads. The mysterious phone call that Jimmy had received on the morning of his disappearance remained unexplained, but investigators had made some progress. Cell tower data showed that the prepaid phone had been used in the Austin area in the days before Jimmy's disappearance, specifically near the offices of several companies that did business with Lone Star Livestock. Someone connected to Lone Star wanted to talk to Jimmy without being traced, concluded investigator Martinez. The question is whether they wanted to threaten him, bribe him, or eliminate him entirely. Meanwhile, the search for Jimmy continued across East Texas. Volunteers had covered hundreds of square miles, checked dozens of abandoned buildings, and followed up on countless tips from well-meaning citizens. But as the weeks passed, hope was beginning to fade. The longer someone stays missing, the less likely they are to be found alive. Sheriff Thompson explained to the assembled media at a press conference 3 weeks after Jimmy's disappearance. But we're not giving up. Jimmy Caldwell was a pillar of this community, and we owe it to him and his family to find out what happened. The press conference generated renewed media attention, which brought both help and complications. Tips poured in from across the state, but most led nowhere. Amateur investigators flooded social media with theories ranging from the plausible to the bizarre. Conspiracy theorists suggested everything from government cover-ups to alien abduction, but one tip stood out from the rest. A truck driver who regularly hauled cattle to processing plants across Texas called to report that he'd seen Jimmy's white pickup truck on the morning of August 15th. Not on Farm Road 1847 where it was found, but on Interstate 35 near Austin, more than 100 miles away. I'm sure it was the same truck, the driver insisted. White Ford F-250 with vet equipment in the back. I remember because I was thinking about getting my dog vaccinated and wondering if the vet made house calls. If true, this sighting suggested that Jimmy had driven much farther than anyone realized on the day he disappeared, and that his truck had somehow been returned to Farm Road 1847 after he vanished. It was a development that changed everything investigators thought they knew about the case. The truck driver's sighting prompted investigators to expand their search for surveillance cameras along Interstate 35. Modern highways are monitored by dozens of cameras, traffic management systems, toll road cameras, and security systems at gas stations and truck stops. If Jimmy's truck had traveled to Austin on August 15th, there should be electronic evidence. After days of reviewing footage, investigators found what they were looking for. Jimmy's truck appeared on 3 different traffic cameras along I-35, heading south toward Austin at approximately 2:30 p.m. on the day he disappeared. Exactly when he should have been arriving at Riverside Ranch for his scheduled farm call. But the truck's driver was invisible in the grainy footage, obscured by sun glare and the angle of the cameras. Investigators couldn't determine if Jimmy was driving his own truck or if someone else had taken it. More troubling was what happened next in the surveillance footage. Jimmy's truck exited the interstate near Austin and disappeared into the city's maze of surface streets. It didn't reappear on highway cameras until nearly 6 p.m., when it was spotted heading north back toward Cedar Ridge. That's a 4-hour window when we don't know where the truck was or what was happening, noted investigator Martinez. 4 hours is enough time for a meeting, a confrontation, or worse. The timeline was becoming clearer, but it raised more questions than it answered. If Jimmy had driven to Austin that afternoon, why hadn't he called his receptionist to cancel the Riverside Ranch appointment? Why hadn't he answered his phone when Tom Hartley called? And most importantly, if Jimmy had driven to Austin voluntarily, Why was his truck found abandoned on a country road with no sign of him? The investigation took another dramatic turn when federal agents arrived in Cedar Ridge. The Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms and Explosives had been conducting their own investigation into Lone Star Livestock, based on tips that the operation might be involved in illegal activities beyond animal welfare violations. ATF agent Sarah Kim briefed local investigators on what federal agents had discovered. Lone Star Livestock was suspected of serving as a front for money laundering operations, using cattle sales to clean money from drug trafficking and other criminal enterprises. The operation was much larger and more sophisticated than anyone had realized. Dr. Caldwell may have stumbled into something much bigger than animal welfare violations, Agent Kim explained. If he discovered evidence of the money laundering operation, that would give certain people powerful motives to silence him. The federal investigation had been building cases against several individuals connected to Lone Star Livestock, but Jimmy's disappearance had accelerated their timeline. They couldn't risk losing their only potential witness to whatever had happened at the facility. Federal agents obtained the search warrant that local investigators had been unable to secure. The search of Lone Star Livestock was scheduled for dawn on September 15th, exactly 1 month after Jimmy's disappearance. The night before the search, Cedar Ridge felt different. Word had leaked that something big was happening, and the town buzzed with nervous energy. People gathered in small groups at the cafe and hardware store, speculating about what investigators might find, and whether it would finally reveal what had happened to their beloved veterinarian. Sarah Chen couldn't sleep that night. She sat in her apartment above the pharmacy, staring out at the dark streets of the town where she and Jimmy had planned to build a life together. I kept thinking that tomorrow we'd finally have answers, she later recalled. I didn't know if I wanted them or not. Sheriff Thompson spent the night reviewing case files, preparing for whatever the federal search might reveal. In his 20 years of law enforcement, he'd never handled a case that had generated so much attention or carried such high stakes. I kept thinking about Jimmy, Sheriff Thompson later reflected. Here was a good man who dedicated his life to helping animals and serving his community. If we couldn't find justice for someone like Jimmy Caldwell, what did that say about all of us? As dawn approached on September 15th, a convoy of federal agents, local investigators, and search specialists prepared to enter Lone Star Livestock. Whatever secrets the facility held were about to be revealed. The federal search of Lone Star Livestock began at sunrise on September 15, 2024. More than 30 agents from various agencies descended on the facility, armed with search warrants that covered every building, vehicle, and acre of the property. What they found exceeded even their worst expectations. The main cattle processing area revealed the animal welfare violations that Jimmy had documented, but they were minor compared to what agents discovered in the facility's administrative offices. Computers contained detailed records of a money laundering operation that had processed millions of dollars through fake cattle sales over the past 3 years. But the most significant discovery came in the south pasture that Jimmy had noted in his report. Ground-penetrating radar revealed multiple burial sites where cattle carcasses had been illegally disposed of. But the sites also contained something else. Mixed in with the animal remains were traces of human DNA. It wasn't Jimmy. Agent Kim was quick to clarify when the news reached Cedar Ridge. The DNA evidence suggests multiple individuals over several years. This facility was being used as a disposal site for more than just cattle. The implications were staggering. Lone Star Livestock hadn't just been laundering money. It had been serving as a disposal site for victims of various criminal enterprises. The remote location and existing infrastructure for processing large animals had made it an ideal location for making inconvenient problems disappear. As federal agents arrested several individuals connected to the operation, including the facility's manager and 2 investors from Dallas, the focus turned back to Jimmy's fate. If he had discovered evidence of the murder and disposal operation, his life had been in immediate danger from the moment he completed his inspection. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. One of the arrested managers, facing federal charges that could result in life imprisonment, decided to cooperate with investigators in exchange for a reduced sentence. Marcus Webb, the facility's operations manager, provided details that finally explained Jimmy's disappearance. Jimmy had indeed discovered evidence of the disposal site during his August inspection, and he had attempted to gather more information before filing his report. but facility security had noticed his interest in the south pasture and reported it to the criminal organization behind the operation. They decided Dr. Caldwell was too dangerous to let live, Webb told investigators. The plan was to make him disappear quietly without connecting it to the facility. On the morning of August 15th, Webb had called Jimmy using the prepaid phone, claiming to be a whistleblower who wanted to provide additional evidence about animal welfare violations at Lone Star. He'd arranged to meet Jimmy at a location near Austin, knowing that Jimmy would come alone to protect his source. Jimmy had driven to the meeting spot, where he was confronted by two men connected to the criminal organization. When Jimmy realized he was in danger, he'd attempted to escape but was overpowered. His truck was driven back to Farm Road 1847 and abandoned there to make his disappearance look like a random event unconnected to his work. What happened to Dr. Caldwell after that? Agent Kim pressed Webb during his confession. Webb's answer brought an end to weeks of hoping and uncertainty. They killed him that same day and disposed of his body at the facility. He's buried in the south pasture with the others. The search of the south pasture intensified, using advanced forensic techniques to locate and recover human remains from the illegal burial site. On September 22, 2024, investigators confirmed that they had found Jimmy Caldwell's body. The news hit Cedar Ridge like a physical blow. The community that had hoped against hope for Jimmy's safe return now had to face the reality that their beloved veterinarian had died because he tried to protect animals and expose the truth. As I conclude on Jimmy Caldwell's story, the sounds of the Texas evening are quieting around us, just as the town of Cedar Ridge had to find a way to heal after learning the truth about Jimmy Caldwell's fate. The investigation that began with a simple missing person report had uncovered a criminal enterprise that stretched across multiple states and involved dozens of victims. Marcus Webb and 4 other individuals were ultimately convicted on federal charges, ranging from money laundering to multiple counts of murder. The dismantling of their operation led to arrests in 3 states and provided closure for families who'd been searching for missing loved ones for years. Lone Star Livestock was permanently shut down, its assets seized by federal authorities. The facility that had been used for such horrific purposes was eventually demolished, and the land was turned over to the state to become a wildlife preserve. A fitting memorial for a man who dedicated his life to protecting animals. Jimmy Caldwell was laid to rest in the Cedar Ridge Cemetery on a hill overlooking the town he'd served so faithfully. His funeral drew more than 1,000 mourners from across Texas, including farmers whose animals he'd treated, colleagues from veterinary school, and complete strangers who'd been touched by his story. Sarah Chen established the James Caldwell Memorial Fund, which provides scholarships for veterinary students who commit to practicing in rural communities. The fund has already helped dozens of young veterinarians follow in Jimmy's footsteps, carrying on his mission of caring for animals in places where good vets are desperately needed. The White House on Elm Street that housed Jimmy's clinic has been converted into a memorial veterinary clinic, operated by volunteer vets who donate their time to continue serving the animals of Cedar Ridge and surrounding counties. As you drift off to sleep tonight, remember Jimmy Caldwell, a man whose commitment to doing what was right ultimately cost him his life, but whose legacy continues to protect and heal animals across rural Texas. Remember that even in our modern world, there are still people willing to stand up for what's right, even when it's dangerous. Sometimes the most ordinary people, a small-town veterinarian who loved his work and his community, become heroes simply by refusing to look the other way when they encounter evil. If you're still awake and listening, please don't forget to comment where you're listening from and the current time in your corner of the world. Also, be sure to like this video and subscribe if you haven't already, so you don't miss our daily true crime stories for sleep. Now let's move on to our next story. Story 3. Tonight we travel to the quiet college town of Moscow, Idaho, where the rolling hills of the Palouse meet the peaceful rhythms of university life. It's a story that begins with friendship, dreams, and the simple joys of being young and full of hope. But on one cold November night in 2022, the tranquility of this small town would be shattered forever. 4 bright young lives would be cut short in a tragedy that would capture the attention of the entire nation and leave a community forever changed. To understand the tragedy that befell the house on King Road, we must first understand the beautiful lives that were lived within its walls. Our story begins with 2 girls who met in the 6th grade and discovered a friendship that would define both of their lives. Kaylee Goncalves and Madison Mogan first crossed paths in the halls of Lake City High School in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. They were friends since 6th grade, two young souls who instantly connected over shared dreams, inside jokes, and the kind of loyalty that only comes from growing up together. Kaylee was the kind of person who lit up every room she entered. Throughout all of her years of education, Kaylee maintained incredible grades and made friends wherever she went. She was known for her infectious laugh, her fierce loyalty to those she loved, and her determination to make the most of every single day. At 21 years old, she stood as a senior at the University of Idaho, majoring in general studies with plans that seemed to change as often as the Idaho seasons. Each new idea more exciting than the last. Madison, or Maddie's as everyone called her, was Kaylee's perfect complement. Where Kaylee was the spark, Maddie was the steady flame. Also 21, she shared Kaylee's love of adventure, but brought a calming presence to their friendship. Teachers remembered both women as having big, bright souls, the kind of students who made teaching worthwhile. The two had been inseparable through high school graduation in 2019, and when it came time for college, there was never any question that they would continue their journey together. The University of Idaho in Moscow became their next chapter, a place where they could spread their wings while still having each other to lean on. Moscow, Idaho, is the kind of college town that exists in the American imagination: tree-lined streets, historic buildings, and a campus that feels like a community unto itself. With a population of just over 25,000, it swells each fall when students arrive for the semester, bringing energy and life to the quiet farming community, nestled in the rolling hills of the Palouse. For Kaylee and Maddie, college life was everything they had hoped it would be. They joined sororities, made new friends, and began to build the kind of memories that were supposed to last a lifetime. They lived together, shared clothes, shared secrets, and shared dreams about what their lives would look like after graduation. By their senior year, they had settled into a rhythm that felt comfortable and right. They shared a bedroom in a house at 1122 King Road, a typical college rental in a neighborhood full of similar houses, where students created their own small communities away from home. The house on King Road was a 3-story structure that had seen countless students come and go over the years. It was the kind of place where late-night study sessions turned into deep conversations, where friendships were forged over shared meals, and where the future always seemed bright and full of possibility. But Kaylee and Maddie weren't the only ones calling this house home. The house at 1122 King Road was home to 6 University of Idaho students, each bringing their own story, their own dreams, and their own place in this tragic tale. Beyond Kaylee and Maddie, who shared the top-floor bedroom, the house was home to 4 other young people navigating the complexities of college life. Zana Kernodle was 20 years old, a junior at the university studying marketing. She had that rare combination of academic dedication and social warmth that made her beloved by both professors and fellow students. Zana lived on the 2nd floor of the house, in a room that she had decorated with the care of someone who understood that home is what you make it, not just where you sleep. Zana had been dating Ethan Chapin for some time, and their relationship was the kind that made their friends believe in love. Ethan was also 20, a sophomore studying recreation, sport, and tourism management. He was known for his kind heart, his easy smile, and his devotion to Zana. Though he lived in the Sigma Chi fraternity house, he spent most of his time at the King Road house, having essentially become part of the family that lived there. The house was also home to 2 other roommates, who lived on the 1st floor. These 2 young women would become central to the investigation that followed, not as victims, but as survivors, who would have to live with the trauma of that night for the rest of their lives. The arrangement worked well for all of them. Like most college houses, it was a place where individual lives intersected in beautiful and messy ways. There were shared meals and shared responsibilities, late-night conversations, and early morning classes. It was a place where young adults were learning to be independent while still having the safety net of friendship and community. November 12, 2022 was a Saturday night, and like many Saturday nights in a college town, it was filled with the kind of activities that define the university experience. There were parties to attend, friends to see, and memories to make. For the residents of 1122 King Road, it would be their last normal night together. Kaylee and Maddie had decided to spend their Saturday evening downtown at the Corner Club, a local bar popular with university students. It was the kind of place where you could count on seeing familiar faces, where the music was loud enough to dance to, but not so loud you couldn't catch up with friends. The two best friends got ready together, sharing clothes and makeup, taking selfies, and anticipating a fun night out. Security footage would later show them walking through downtown Moscow, arm in arm, laughing and talking as they made their way between venues. Surveillance video appears to show Kaylee Goncalves and Maddie Mogan walking in Moscow hours before they were killed. Meanwhile, Zana and Ethan had spent their evening at a Sigma Chi party. Friends would later describe them as being happy and relaxed, enjoying time with their fraternity friends and looking forward to the rest of their weekend. Ethan, despite living at the fraternity house, had planned to spend the night at King Road with Zana, as he often did. By all accounts, it was a typical Saturday night for college students. There was nothing to suggest that danger was lurking, nothing to indicate that this would be anything other than another weekend night filled with laughter, friendship, and the simple joy of being young and alive. The four friends would all return to 1122 King Road that night, each taking different paths home, each anticipating nothing more than a good night's sleep, before facing whatever Sunday might bring. None of them could have imagined that they were walking into the final hours of their lives, or that their names would soon be known across the nation for the most tragic of reasons. As the night wore on and Moscow settled into the quiet hours before dawn, the house on King Road held 6 young people, all of whom believed they were safe in their home, surrounded by friends with their whole lives ahead of them. The early hours of November 13, 2022, unfolded like countless other Sunday mornings in college towns across America. Students were returning home from various Saturday night activities, some calling it an early night, others extending their evening into the small hours of the morning. Kaylee and Maddie had left the Corner Club around 1:30 a.m., making their way to a late-night food truck called the Grub Truck, a Moscow institution that served hungry college students during the weekend late-night hours. The food truck was located on Main Street, and it was the kind of place where students would gather after the bars closed, sharing stories from the night and satisfying late-night cravings. Security footage from the food truck would later show the two best friends ordering food, chatting with other students, and appearing to be in good spirits. They seemed relaxed and happy, just two college seniors enjoying a typical weekend night. There was nothing in their demeanor to suggest they felt threatened or unsafe. Around 1:56 a.m., Kaylee and Maddie caught a ride home through a private party service that was popular with students. The ride was brief, just a few minutes through the quiet streets of Moscow to their house on King Road. By approximately 2 a.m. they were safely inside their home, probably looking forward to getting some sleep. Meanwhile, Zana and Ethan had also made their way back to King Road from the Sigma Chi party. They arrived at the house around the same time as Kaylee and Maddie, the four friends converging on their shared home as the night transitioned into early morning. The house settled into what should have been peaceful sleep. The four victims were stabbed to death on the second and third floors of the residence, where they had been in bed. The two roommates on the first floor were also home, and the house contained 6 young people, all believing they were safe in their shared sanctuary. What happened next would forever change not just the lives of those in the house, but the entire community of Moscow, Idaho. Preliminary autopsy results show that the 4 victims were likely attacked with a large knife, and died sometime after 2 a.m. The attack was swift and brutal, occurring while the victims were at their most vulnerable. Police say the victims were most likely asleep when they were attacked. The house, which had been filled with the quiet sounds of young people settling in for the night, became the scene of an unimaginable tragedy. The killer moved through the house with a purpose that would later terrify investigators. Mogan and Goncalves were found in Mogan's bedroom, and Kernodle and Chapin were found in Kernodle's room. The best friends who had shared so much of their lives together were found together in death, their final moments spent in the room where they had shared countless conversations about their dreams and plans for the future. The victims were not gagged or restrained, and the walls at the scene were spattered with blood. The violence of the attack shocked even experienced investigators who had seen many crime scenes throughout their careers. But perhaps the most chilling aspect of this tragedy was its randomness. These were not people involved in dangerous activities or risky lifestyles. They were ordinary college students living ordinary lives, believing they were safe in their own home. The attack seemed to come from nowhere, targeting 4 young people who had done nothing to deserve such a fate. As dawn broke over Moscow on November 13, 2022, the house on King Road held secrets that would soon rock a community and captivate a nation. But for several more hours, the world remained unaware of the tragedy that had unfolded in the quiet hours before sunrise. Sunday, November 13th, 2022, dawned crisp and clear in Moscow, Idaho. It was the kind of autumn day that makes the Polos region famous. Golden light filtering through bare tree branches, the promise of winter in the air, and the peaceful quiet that settles over college towns on Sunday mornings. For most residents of Moscow, it was a day that began like any other. Coffee shops opened to serve students cramming for exams, families prepared for church services, and the rhythms of small-town life continued their familiar patterns. No one could have imagined that this Sunday would become a day that would divide their community's history into before and after. As the morning progressed into afternoon, concern began to grow among friends and family of the residents of 1122 King Road. Phone calls went unanswered, text messages remained unread, and plans that had been made for Sunday activities went unfulfilled. By early afternoon, friends of the roommates had become worried enough to come to the house to check on them. They knew it wasn't like their friends to be completely unreachable, especially when they had made plans for the day. College students might sleep in after a Saturday night out, but they typically responded to calls and messages by afternoon. At approximately 11:58 a.m., a 911 call was placed from the King Road house. The caller reported an unconscious person, though the exact details of that call would later become a subject of intense scrutiny and investigation. What is known is that the call brought Moscow police to a scene that would haunt them for years to come. When officers arrived at 1122 King Road, they encountered a scene of unimaginable horror. The house that had been filled with laughter, friendship, and dreams just hours before had become the site of a quadruple homicide that would shake the foundations of this peaceful college community. Kaylee, her lifelong best friend and roommate Madison Mogan, a third roommate Xana Kernodle, and Kernodle's boyfriend Ethan Chepin were stabbed to death inside the girls' off-campus house. 2 other roommates survived the shocking crime. The 2 surviving roommates, who had been on the first floor during the attack, were found unharmed but traumatized beyond measure. They would later be cleared as suspects, but they would carry the psychological scars of that night for the rest of their lives. The scene that investigators encountered was one of extreme violence. The victims were likely stabbed multiple times in their sleep mere days before Thanksgiving break. The randomness and brutality of the attack sent shockwaves through the investigating team and the community at large. Moscow Police Chief James Fry would later describe the scene as one of the most challenging his department had ever encountered. The small college town, which typically dealt with noise complaints and minor infractions, was suddenly facing a quadruple homicide that would require resources and expertise far beyond their normal scope. As news of the murders spread through Moscow and beyond, the reaction was immediate and intense. The University of Idaho campus was placed on lockdown, students were advised to shelter in place, and parents across the country began frantically calling their college-age children to make sure they were safe. Social media exploded with speculation, fear, and disbelief. How could something like this happen in Moscow, Idaho? Who could have committed such a heinous act? And most frighteningly of all, was the killer still out there? The investigation that followed would become one of the most closely watched criminal cases in recent American history, involving multiple law enforcement agencies, advanced forensic techniques, and a level of public scrutiny that few cases have ever experienced. But as the sun set on November 13, 2022, all that was certain was that 4 bright young lives had been cut short, 2 families had been shattered, a community had been traumatized, and somewhere out there, a killer walked free. In the hours and days following the discovery of the bodies at 1122 King Road, Moscow, Idaho, transformed from a sleepy college town into the epicenter of one of the most closely watched criminal investigations in recent memory. The small community, unaccustomed to such violence, struggled to process what had happened within their borders. The University of Idaho's campus, normally bustling with students heading to classes and social activities, became eerily quiet. The shocking crime garnered national intrigue, and suddenly this remote college town found itself under an international spotlight it had never sought. Moscow police, working alongside Idaho State Police and the FBI, established a massive crime scene at the King Road house. The investigation required a level of forensic expertise that extended far beyond what the local department typically handled. Federal agents, crime scene specialists, and forensic experts descended on the quiet residential street, turning it into a hub of investigative activity. The house itself became a fortress of yellow tape and law enforcement vehicles. Neighbors, many of whom were also college students, found themselves living next to an active crime scene, a constant reminder of the violence that had shattered their sense of security. Chief James Fry faced the enormous challenge of leading an investigation that had captured national attention while managing a community gripped by fear. At press conferences that were broadcast live across the country, he tried to balance the need for public information with the integrity of the ongoing investigation. The lack of immediate answers fueled speculation and fear throughout the community. Students began traveling in groups, parents pleaded with their children to come home, and local businesses reported a significant drop in foot traffic as people avoided going out after dark. The investigation team faced several immediate challenges. The walls at the scene were spattered with blood, indicating the extreme violence of the attack, but there were few obvious clues pointing to the perpetrator's identity. The killer had somehow entered and exited the house without leaving behind clear evidence of their identity. Investigators began the painstaking process of collecting physical evidence, interviewing potential witnesses, and reconstructing the timeline of that tragic night. They collected DNA samples, fingerprints, digital evidence from phones and computers, and began the process of analyzing the victim's final hours. The media attention was unprecedented for a case in Idaho. National news trucks lined the streets of Moscow, reporters from major networks broadcast live from outside the crime scene, and true crime enthusiasts on social media began their own amateur investigations. This level of attention created both opportunities and challenges for the investigation. While the publicity helped generate tips and potential leads from across the country, it also created pressure for quick results, and led to the spread of misinformation and speculation that sometimes hindered the investigation. The victims' families, already dealing with unimaginable grief, found themselves thrust into a public spotlight they had never wanted. Parents of the University of Idaho victims struggled to balance their need for privacy and their grief, with their desire to keep their children's cases in the public eye. Kaylee's family in particular became vocal advocates for the investigation, giving interviews and making public statements urging anyone with information to come forward. Their pain was visible and raw, and it humanized the case for millions of people following the story. As weeks passed without an arrest, the pressure on investigators intensified. The community demanded answers, the media demanded updates, and the families demanded justice. But the investigation team, led by experienced detectives who understood the importance of building a solid case, continued their methodical work despite the external pressure. The case became a fixture on true crime podcasts, social media discussions, and cable news programs. Amateur sleuths analyzed every piece of public information, creating theories and timelines that sometimes helped and sometimes hindered the official investigation. Through it all, the house on King Road stood as a silent witness to the tragedy that had unfolded within its walls, its windows boarded up, its yard surrounded by police tape, a stark reminder that evil had visited this quiet college town and left 4 bright lives extinguished. As 2022 drew to a close and winter settled over Moscow, Idaho, the investigation into the King Road murders continued with the methodical pace that characterizes complex criminal cases. Behind the scenes, investigators were following hundreds of leads, analyzing thousands of pieces of evidence, and slowly building a picture of what had happened on that tragic November night. The breakthrough would come from a combination of traditional detective work and modern forensic science. Investigators had been meticulously analyzing DNA evidence collected from the crime scene, looking for any trace that didn't belong to the victims or the surviving roommates. Advanced DNA analysis techniques allowed investigators to develop a genetic profile of the suspected perpetrator. This profile was then run through various databases, including those used for genealogical research, in an attempt to identify potential suspects. Meanwhile, investigators had been analyzing other evidence from the scene and the surrounding area. Vehicle registration databases were searched, cell phone data was analyzed, and witness statements were compiled and cross-referenced. The investigation was massive in scope, involving multiple agencies and hundreds of investigators working around the clock. On December 30th, 2022, the investigation took a dramatic turn. Law enforcement officers in Pennsylvania arrested 28-year-old Brian Kohberger at his parents' home in the Pocono Mountains region. Brian Kohberger is accused of killing 4 college students on November 13, 2022. Kohberger was a graduate student in criminal justice and criminology at Washington State University, located just across the state border from Moscow, Idaho. The irony of his academic focus was not lost on investigators or the publicness here, was someone who had studied the very field that was now being used to investigate him. The arrest brought a sense of relief to the Moscow community, but also raised new questions. How had someone studying criminal justice allegedly committed such a brutal crime? What had motivated such violence against 4 people who, by all accounts, he had no known connection to? The evidence against Kohberger was substantial. DNA evidence allegedly linked him to the crime scene, and investigators had traced his movements through cell phone data and vehicle registrations. His white Hyundai Elantra had been identified as a vehicle of interest in the case, and records showed it had been in the Moscow area during the time of the murders. The arrest affidavit, when it was eventually released, painted a picture of a methodical investigation that had slowly closed in on Kohberger over several weeks. Investigators had been watching him for some time before making the arrest, building their case carefully to ensure they had sufficient evidence for prosecution. For the families of the victims, the arrest brought a mixture of relief and continued pain. While they were grateful that someone had been charged with their children's murders, no arrest could bring back Kaylee, Maddie, Xana, and Ethan. The legal process would be long and difficult, and they knew that reliving the details of their children's final moments would be part of seeking justice. The University of Idaho community also reacted with mixed emotions. While there was relief that a suspect was in custody, the arrest couldn't erase the trauma that the community had experienced. The sense of innocence and safety that had once characterized campus life had been permanently altered. Kohberger was extradited back to Idaho to face charges, and the legal proceedings began. He was charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of burglary. The prosecution would seek the death penalty, arguing that the premeditated nature of the crime and the number of victims warranted the ultimate punishment. As the case moved into the legal system, the focus shifted from investigation to prosecution. The evidence would be presented in court, witnesses would testify, and a jury would ultimately decide Kohberger's fate. But for now, the community could begin the long process of healing, knowing that someone was being held accountable for the tragedy that had shattered their sense of security. The house on King Road, which had stood empty since the murders, became a symbol of both tragedy and resilience. Plans were made to eventually demolish the structure, as it had become too painful a reminder for the community to bear. But the memories of the 4 young lives that had been lost there would endure forever. As the legal proceedings against Brian Kohberger moved forward, the focus of the community began to shift from the horror of what had happened to the celebration of the lives that had been lost. The 4 victims of the King Road murders had been so much more than the tragedy that ended their lives, and their families and friends were determined that they be remembered for who they were, not how they died. Kaylee Goncalves, the bright young woman with dreams as big as the Idaho sky, was remembered as someone who approached life with unbridled enthusiasm. Her family shared stories of her determination, her loyalty, and her infectious laugh that could brighten any room. She had been planning to graduate early and move to Texas to start a new career. Dreams that would never be fulfilled, but that spoke to her ambitious spirit. Madison Mogan, Kaylee's best friend since 6th grade, was remembered as the steady, reliable presence in any group. Her friends described her as someone you could always count on, whether you needed help with homework, a shoulder to cry on, or someone to share in your celebrations. The bond between Kaylee and Maddie had been special, the kind of friendship that comes along once in a lifetime. Xana Kernodle was remembered as a young woman who had found her perfect match in Ethan Chapin. Their relationship had been one of mutual support and genuine love, and friends described them as a couple who made everyone around them believe in the possibility of true love. Xana's academic achievements and her warm personality had made her beloved by both professors and fellow students. Ethan Chapin, the youngest of the 4 victims at just 20 years old, was remembered as someone with a kind heart and an easy smile. His fraternity brothers described him as loyal and genuine, someone who treated everyone with respect and kindness. His love for Xana was evident to everyone who knew them, and his frequent presence at the King Road house had made him part of the family there. A memorial was held for Kaylee Goncalves and Madison Mogan, celebrating their lives and the impact they had made on everyone who knew them. The service was filled with stories, laughter through tears, and a determination to honor their memory by living fully and loving deeply. The University of Idaho community also came together to remember the victims. Memorial services, scholarship funds, and campus initiatives were established to ensure that Kaylee, Maddie, Xana, and Ethan would not be forgotten. Their names were added to campus memorials, and their stories became part of the university's history. The impact of their deaths extended far beyond their immediate circle of family and friends. The case had touched people across the nation who had followed the story and felt a connection to these four young people they had never met. Social media was filled with tributes, memories, and expressions of support for the families. The tragedy also sparked important conversations about safety, both on college campuses and in small communities. Universities across the country reviewed their security protocols, students became more aware of their surroundings, and families had difficult but necessary conversations about personal safety. For the surviving roommates, the path forward was particularly challenging. They had lost not just friends but their sense of security and normalcy. The trauma of that night would be something they would carry with them forever, but they also became symbols of resilience and the possibility of healing after unimaginable loss. The King Road house itself became a subject of community debate. Many felt it should be demolished, as it had become too painful a reminder of the tragedy. Others argued for its preservation as a memorial. Ultimately, the decision was made to demolish the structure, with the understanding that the true memorial to the victims would be in the lives they had touched and the love they had shared. As months passed and the seasons changed in Moscow, the community began to find ways to move forward while still honoring the memory of the four victims. It was a delicate balance between healing and remembrance, between returning to normal life and never forgetting the tragedy that had changed everything. The families of the victims became advocates not just for justice in their specific case, but for awareness about violence against young people and the importance of community support in times of tragedy. Their strength in the face of unimaginable loss became an inspiration to many who followed their journey. The case also highlighted the power of community in times of crisis. The outpouring of support for the families, the cooperation between law enforcement agencies, and the way the university and town came together showed the best of human nature in response to the worst of human actions. As 2023 progressed and the legal proceedings in the case moved forward, the families of Kaylee, Maddie, Xana, and Ethan continued their long journey toward whatever healing might be possible after such profound loss. The path to justice in a case of this magnitude is never quick or simple, and they knew that years might pass before the legal process was complete. Brian Koberger's case moved through the Idaho court system with the careful deliberation that capital cases require. His defense team mounted various legal challenges, while prosecutors built their case methodically, knowing that they would need to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that he was responsible for the murders. The evidence in the case was complex and multifaceted. DNA evidence, cell phone data, vehicle records, and witness statements all played roles in building the prosecution's case. The defense, as is their right and responsibility, challenged this evidence and sought to create reasonable doubt about their client's guilt. For the families, each court appearance and legal filing was a reminder of their loss, but also a step toward potential justice. They attended hearings when possible, issued statements to the media, and worked to ensure that their children's cases remained in the public consciousness. On the 2-year mark of the gruesome crime, parents of the University of Idaho victims spoke out, sharing their ongoing grief, but also their determination to see justice served. Their strength and dignity in the face of unimaginable loss continued to inspire those following the case. The University of Idaho also continued its healing process. New security measures were implemented, counseling services were expanded, and programs were created to honor the memory of the four victims. The campus community learned to balance the need to move forward with education and campus life, while never forgetting what had been lost. The case had a lasting impact on true crime coverage and social media investigation. The intense public interest and amateur sleuthing that had surrounded the case led to discussions about the ethics of online investigation and the balance between public interest and privacy for victims' families. Moscow, Idaho gradually returned to its rhythms as a college town, but it was forever changed. The innocence that had once characterized the community was gone, replaced by a more cautious awareness of the potential for evil to intrude into even the most peaceful places. The house on King Road was eventually demolished, but not before becoming a pilgrimage site for those touched by the story. People came from across the country to pay their respects, leaving flowers, notes, and tokens of remembrance for four young people they had never met, but whose story had touched their hearts. In its place, discussions began about what should occupy that space. Some suggested a memorial garden, others a scholarship fund building. Still others believed the site should simply return to being a normal part of the neighborhood. Whatever decision was ultimately made, it would need to balance the need for remembrance with the community's desire to heal and move forward. The surviving roommates, whose names were kept private to protect them from unwanted attention, began the long process of rebuilding their lives. They had counseling resources available to them, and the university and community worked to ensure they had the support they needed to continue their education if they chose to do so. As our story draws to a close tonight, with the gentle rain continuing to fall outside your window, we remember that true crime stories are not just about the crimes themselves, but about the lives that were lived, the love that was shared, and the communities that must find ways to heal after tragedy strikes. Kaylee Goncalves, Madison Mogan, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin were not just victims of a crime, they were beloved children, loyal friends, dedicated students, and young people full of dreams and potential. Story 4. Gabby Petito was the kind of young woman who lit up every room she entered. Born on March 19, 1999, in Blue Point, New York, she had moved to Florida with dreams as big as the open road stretching before her. At 22, she stood just 5 feet 5 inches tall, with blonde hair that caught the sunlight and blue eyes that sparkled with wanderlust. Gabby worked at a local juice bar in Northport, but her real passion lay in travel and photography. She spent hours curating her Instagram account, at Gabs Petito, sharing glimpses of her life with her growing following. Her posts were filled with golden hour selfies, inspirational quotes about adventure, and dreams of van life. That increasingly popular lifestyle of converting vehicles into mobile homes and traveling the country. Brian Laundrie was 2 years younger than Gabby, born on November 18, 1997. He was a quiet, often introspective young man who had been dating Gabby on and off for over 2 years. Their relationship was passionate but complicated. Friends and family would later describe it as intense, with moments of deep connection punctuated by occasional friction. In early 2021, Gabby and Brian decided to take their relationship on the ultimate test, a cross-country van life adventure. They purchased a white 2012 Ford Transit van, which they converted into a mobile home. The van became their project, their sanctuary, and eventually their prison. The conversion process took months. They installed a bed, storage compartments, and the basic necessities for life on the road. Gabby documented every step on social media, her excitement palpable in every post. Van life or no life, she would caption her photos, using hashtags like #vanlife and #nomadlife. Their plan was ambitious. They would travel across the American West, visiting national parks, camping under starlit skies, and documenting their journey for Gabby's growing social media presence. She dreamed of becoming a travel blogger, maybe even landing sponsorship deals. This trip was supposed to be the beginning of their new life together. On July 2nd, 2021, Gabby and Brian officially began their cross-country adventure. Their white Ford Transit van, affectionately nicknamed the van in Gabby's posts, pulled out of Northport, Florida, loaded with dreams and supplies for what was planned to be a 4-month journey. Their first major stop was in Kansas, where they visited Brian's sister Cassie and her family. The visit seemed pleasant enough. Family photos showed the couple smiling, Gabby playing with Brian's young nephews. But even then, there were subtle signs that not everything was perfect in paradise. From Kansas, they headed west toward Colorado. Gabby's Instagram posts from this period show breathtaking landscapes, endless skies, mountain vistas, and the couple looking happy in their photos. But social media, as we all know, often tells only part of the story. Their route took them through Colorado Springs, where they hiked and explored. Gabby posted a photo of herself doing yoga on a rock formation. Caption: "Finding my balance." They visited the Great Sand Dunes National Park, where Gabby's joy seemed genuine in photos of her running barefoot through the sand. From Colorado, they traveled to Utah, the state that would become central to their story. Utah's national parks were on every van life enthusiast's bucket list. Arches, Canyonlands, Capitol Reef, Bryce Canyon, and Zion. For young adventurers like Gabby and Brian, Utah represented the ultimate van life destination. They arrived in Moab, Utah, on August 12, 2021. Moab is a small desert town that serves as the gateway to Arches and Canyonlands national parks. With its red rock formations, stunning desert landscapes, and outdoor adventure opportunities, it attracts thousands of visitors every year. But August 12th would become a date that would haunt this case forever. Because on that sweltering summer day in Moab, something happened that would set in motion a chain of events leading to tragedy. It was approximately 4:30 p.m. on August 12, 2021, when a 911 call came into the Grand County Sheriff's Office in Moab, Utah. The caller reported a domestic dispute involving a white van and a young couple. The caller described seeing a man slapping a woman, and the situation appeared to be escalating. When Officer Eric Pratt of the Moab Police Department responded to the call, he spotted the white Ford Transit van traveling north on Main Street. The van was speeding and swerving, showing clear signs of erratic driving. Officer Pratt initiated a traffic stop near the entrance to Arches National Park. What happened next was captured on police body camera footage that would later be analyzed frame by millions of viewers. As Officer Pratt approached the van, he found 22-year-old Gabby Petito in an extremely emotional state. She was crying, hyperventilating, and clearly distressed. "We've been fighting all morning," Gabby told the officer through her tears. She explained that she and Brian had been under stress, that she'd been working on her blog and website, and that the pressure of the trip and living in such close quarters had been getting to both of them. Brian Laundrie appeared calm and collected when speaking with the officers. He was polite, cooperative, and presented himself as the more level-headed of the two. He told officers that Gabby had been having what he called episodes, periods of anxiety and emotional distress that had been affecting their relationship. The body camera footage shows Gabby taking responsibility for the physical altercation. She told officers that she had hit Brian first, that she was the aggressor in the situation. She explained that she had grabbed the steering wheel while he was driving, which had caused the erratic driving that led to the traffic stop. But there were details in the police report that painted a more complex picture. Witnesses had reported seeing Brian grab Gabby's face and push her back before the physical altercation occurred. There were visible scratches on Brian's face and arm, which he claimed were from Gabby hitting him. The officers faced a difficult decision. Technically, based on Utah law and Gabby's admission that she had struck Brian first, she could have been arrested for domestic violence. However, the officers ultimately decided to separate the couple for the night rather than make an arrest. Gabby spent the night in the van at a local hotel parking lot, while Brian was given a free night at a local motel. The officers' report classified the incident as a mental health breaks rather than domestic violence, a decision that would later be heavily scrutinized. The next morning, August 13th, the couple reunited and continued their journey. To the outside world, through Gabby's social media posts, everything appeared to return to normal. She posted photos of beautiful Utah landscapes, selfies with bright smiles, and captions about gratitude and adventure. But for those who knew how to read between the lines, the cracks were beginning to show. Following the Moab incident, Gabby and Brian continued their journey through Utah's stunning national parks. For the next 2 weeks, Gabby's social media presence continued, though those who knew her well would later say the posts seemed different. More forced, less spontaneous. On August 19th, Gabby posted a photo from Canyonlands National Park. She's sitting on the edge of a cliff, arms raised toward the sky, with the caption, "Happy Halloween." It was a quirky, vintage-style photo that seemed to capture her free spirit. But it would be one of her last authentic posts. Around August 17th, the couple had traveled to Salt Lake City, where they spent several days. During this time, Brian flew back to Florida alone, ostensibly to help his parents move items out of a storage unit and clear out their home office so he could move in upon their return from the road trip. Gabby stayed behind in Salt Lake City, staying in a hotel by herself. This separation raised questions that would never be fully answered. Why did Brian need to fly back to Florida for what seemed like a simple moving task? Why couldn't it wait until their return? Friends and family noted that this seemed unusual for the couple, who had been essentially inseparable since starting their journey. Brian returned to Salt Lake City on August 23rd, and the couple resumed their travels. Their next destination was Grand Teton National Park in Wyoming, followed by Yellowstone National Park. These were to be the crown jewels of their van life adventure. On August 25th, Gabby posted what would become her final Instagram post. It was a photo of herself holding a small pumpkin, taken at a farmer's market in Utah. The caption read, "Happy Halloween, it's the little things." The post seemed innocent enough, but later analysis would reveal inconsistencies that suggested it might not have been posted by Gabby herself. The last confirmed communication from Gabby came in a text message to her mother, Nicole Schmidt, on August 27th. The message read, "Can you help Stan? I just keep getting his voicemails and missed calls." The Stan was Gabby's grandfather, but the reference was odd. Gabby had never referred to her grandfather by his first name before. She always called him Grandpa. Nicole Schmidt would later say this text message immediately raised red flags. The language didn't sound like Gabby, and the request was unusual. Schmidt tried calling and texting back immediately, but received no response. On August 30th, another text was sent from Gabby's phone, "No service in Yosemite." This message was even more concerning, because Gabby and Brian were supposed to be in Grand Teton National Park in Wyoming, not Yosemite in California. These would be the last communications from Gabby's phone. Somewhere in the vast wilderness of Wyoming, in the shadow of the Grand Teton Mountains, a young woman's dream adventure had become a nightmare. And as August faded into September, the silence from Gabby would become deafening. September 1st, 2021, was a day that would forever be etched in the memories of the Petito and Schmidt families. On that quiet Wednesday morning, a white Ford Transit van pulled into the driveway of the Laundrie family home at 2926 Bayshore Drive in Northport, Florida. But something was terribly wrong with this homecoming. The van that had left Florida 2 months earlier, carrying 2 young adventurers, had returned with only one occupant, Brian Laundrie. Brian's parents, Christopher and Roberta Laundrie, welcomed their son home without any apparent concern about Gabby's absence. To the neighbors who might have noticed, it appeared to be a normal family reunion. Brian helped unload items from the van, the family gathered for dinner, and life resumed its regular rhythm at the Laundrie household. But 1,200 miles away in New York, Gabby's family was growing increasingly worried. Nicole Schmidt, Gabby's mother, had not heard from her daughter since that strange text message on August 30th about being in Yosemite. Every call to Gabby's phone went straight to voicemail. Every text message went unanswered. What made the silence even more troubling was that it was completely out of character for Gabby. She was the type of person who stayed in constant communication with her family, often sending multiple texts a day with photos, updates, and random thoughts. The sudden radio silence was alarm bells screaming in the darkness. Nicole Schmidt tried a different approach. She reached out to Brian Laundrie directly, sending texts and making phone calls to ask about Gabby's whereabouts. But Brian didn't respond to any of her attempts at communication. She tried contacting Brian's parents, but they too remained silent. For 10 agonizing days, the Petito and Schmidt families were left in limbo. They had no idea where Gabby was, if she was safe, or why no one from the Laundrie family would respond to their increasingly desperate pleas for information. During this time, Brian Laundrie was living a seemingly normal life at his parents' home. Neighbors would later report seeing him doing yard work, going for bike rides, and helping his father with household projects. He appeared calm and unbothered by the growing concerns about his missing fiancée. The Laundrie family's behavior during this period would later become a source of intense scrutiny and criticism. They had clearly been told something about Gabby's absence, yet they made no effort to contact her family or assist in any search efforts. Their silence was deafening, and to many observers deeply troubling. On September 10th, Nicole Schmidt had reached her breaking point. With still no word from Gabby or the Laundrie family, she made a decision that would launch one of the most high-profile missing person cases in recent American history. She contacted the Suffolk County Police Department in New York and filed a missing person report for her daughter. The wheels of justice were finally beginning to turn, but precious time had already been lost. 10 days had passed since Brian Laundrie returned home alone. 10 days during which crucial evidence could have been preserved, witnesses could have been interviewed, and search efforts could have begun. As September 10th faded into evening, Gabby Petito was officially classified as a missing person. Somewhere in the American West, a young woman's fate remained unknown, while the man who might hold the answers to her disappearance remained silent in a Florida suburb. Once Gabby Petito was officially reported missing on September 10th, 2021, law enforcement agencies across multiple states began coordinating what would become a massive search effort. The FBI's Denver office took the lead on the case, given that Gabby was last known to be in Wyoming. The first major break came from analyzing Gabby's social media presence and digital footprint. Investigators were able to trace the couple's movements through Gabby's Instagram posts, credit card transactions, and cell phone data. This digital trail painted a picture of their journey and helped narrow down the search area. On September 11th, Northport police visited the Laundrie family home to ask about Gabby's disappearance. This was when the family's behavior became even more troubling. Instead of speaking with police directly, the Laundries referred them to their attorney, Stephen Bertolino, who provided a brief statement, but no useful information about Gabby's whereabouts. The attorney's statement was cold and legalistic. The advice of counsel is that Mr. Laundrie remain in the background at this juncture and allow the FBI to come forward with the information they feel is appropriate to disseminate to the public. This response outraged Gabby's family and the growing number of people following the case online. Here was a young woman missing in the wilderness, and the person who was with her was refusing to help with the search efforts. It seemed incomprehensible to many observers. On September 14th, Brian Laundrie was officially named a person of interest in Gabby's disappearance. This designation meant that while he wasn't formally a suspect, investigators wanted to speak with him about what he knew regarding Gabby's last known movements. But Brian's cooperation was not forthcoming. Through his attorney, he continued to assert his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination and refused to speak with investigators. This legal right, while constitutional, struck many people as morally questionable when a person's life was potentially at stake. Meanwhile, social media had exploded with interest in the case. The hashtag #FindGabbyPetito began trending on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Amateur internet sleuths began analyzing every photo, every social media post, and every piece of available information about the couple's journey. Some of these amateur investigators actually provided valuable assistance to law enforcement. They identified locations and background photos, found witness accounts, and helped map the couple's movements across the western United States. One particular social media user, Miranda Baker, came forward with crucial information. She posted a TikTok video explaining that she had given Brian Laundrie a ride near Grand Teton National Park on August 29th. According to Baker, Brian had been hitchhiking alone and seemed agitated when she mentioned going to Jackson Hole, asking to be let out of the vehicle immediately. This account was significant because it placed Brian in the Grand Teton area around the time of Gabby's last known communications, and it suggested he was alone and possibly in distress. As the search efforts intensified, the FBI began focusing on Grand Teton National Park and the surrounding Bridger-Teton National Forest. These vast wilderness areas encompassed hundreds of thousands of acres of rugged terrain, including dense forests, alpine lakes, and challenging mountain terrain. Search teams included FBI agents, local law enforcement, search and rescue volunteers, and specialized canine units. They used helicopters, drones, and ground teams to cover as much territory as possible. But finding one person in such a vast wilderness was like looking for a needle in a haystack. On September 17th, the case took another dramatic turn. Northport police arrived at the Laundrie family home to execute a search warrant and found something that would shock investigators and the public alike. Brian Laundrie was gone. According to his parents, Brian had left on September 14th to go hiking in the Carlton Reserve. a 25,000-acre wilderness area near their home. He had taken a backpack and told them he was going for a hike, but he never returned home. Now law enforcement was faced with not one missing person, but two. Gabby Petito remained missing somewhere in Wyoming, while Brian Laundrie had vanished into the Florida wilderness. The case that had already captured national attention was about to become even more complex and tragic. September 19, 2021, dawned clear and crisp in the mountains of Wyoming. FBI search teams had been combing the Grand Teton National Park area for days, following up on tips, witness accounts, and digital evidence that suggested Gabby and Brian had been in this area in late August. The breakthrough came from an unlikely source, a family of YouTubers called Red, White, and Bethune who had been camping in the Bridger Teton National Forest on August 27th. They had been filming their camping adventure, and later, after hearing about the search for Gabby, they reviewed their footage. In the background of one of their videos, barely visible in the distance, was a white van parked in an area known as the Spread Creek Dispersed Camping Area. The van appeared to be a Ford Transit, matching the description of Gabby and Brian's converted home on wheels. This video evidence helped focus the search efforts on a specific area of the vast wilderness. On September 19th, search teams concentrated their efforts around Spread Creek, an area popular with dispersed campers who prefer to camp outside of established campgrounds. At approximately 3:40 p.m. Mountain Time, FBI investigators discovered what they had been searching for, but not what they had hoped to find. Human remains were located in the Bridger Teton National Forest, in an area consistent with the location of the white van seen in the YouTube video. The discovery was made in a remote area, several hundred yards from where the van had been parked. The remains were found near a makeshift fire ring, in an area that showed signs of recent camping activity. The FBI immediately secured the scene and called in forensic specialists. The area was treated as a potential crime scene, with investigators carefully documenting every detail, photographing the location, and collecting potential evidence. That evening, the FBI held a press conference to announce the discovery. Special Agent in Charge Michael Schneider spoke to gathered media. Earlier today, human remains were discovered in the Bridger Teton National Forest in Wyoming by law enforcement agents conducting a search for Gabby Petito in the area. The remains were found in an area where a scattered camp and a fire ring were located. While the FBI could not immediately confirm the identity of the remains, the location and circumstances strongly suggested they had found Gabby Petito. For her family, who had held on to hope for weeks, this news was devastating. The discovery sent shockwaves across the nation. Millions of people who had been following the case through social media felt a collective grief for a young woman they had never met, but whose story had touched their hearts. On September 21st, 2021, the Teton County Coroner's Office officially confirmed what everyone feared. The remains found in the Wyoming wilderness were those of 22-year-old Gabby Petito. Dr. Brent Blue, the Teton County coroner, announced that the manner of death was homicide, though the specific cause of death would not be released immediately pending further investigation. The confirmation that Gabby had been murdered turned a missing person case into a homicide investigation. The news of Gabby's death was met with an outpouring of grief from around the world. Her family released a statement. "We want to thank the FBI and other law enforcement for their dedication and tireless efforts in finding Gabby. We ask that you all give us time to process this incredibly difficult time and give us space to grieve." But even as the nation mourned for Gabby, another mystery was deepening in the swamps of Florida, where Brian Laundrie remained missing and the subject of an increasingly intense manhunt. With Gabby's death confirmed as a homicide, the search for Brian Laundrie took on new urgency. He was no longer just a person of interest in a missing person case. He was now the primary suspect in a murder investigation. On September 23, 2021, a federal arrest warrant was issued for Brian Laundrie. The charge was for the unauthorized use of Gabby's debit card and credit cards after her death, transactions that totaled more than $1,000 between August 30th and September 1st. While this wasn't a murder charge, it gave law enforcement the legal authority to arrest him. The search for Brian Laundrie became one of the most intensive manhunts in recent American history. The Carlton Reserve in Florida, where his parents claimed he had gone hiking, became the focus of massive search efforts involving hundreds of law enforcement officers, search dogs, helicopters, drones, and specialized swamp vehicles. The 25, 000-acre reserve was a challenging search environment with dense vegetation, swampland, alligators, and venomous snakes. Search teams worked in grueling conditions, following up on tips and searching areas where Brian might have gone to ground. For weeks, the search continued with no sign of Brian Laundrie. Reported sightings came in from across the country, but none proved credible. The FBI received thousands of tips, each one requiring investigation and follow-up. The case had become a national obsession. Cable news channels provided round-the-clock coverage, protesters gathered outside the Laundrie family home, and social media was filled with theories, speculation, and demands for justice. On October 12, 2021, Dr. Brent Blue, the Teton County coroner, released additional details about Gabby's death. He announced that she had died by manual strangulation and that her body had been in the wilderness for 3 to 4 weeks before it was discovered. The brutality of the crime shocked even those who had been following the case closely. The manhunt for Brian Laundrie continued into October, with no sign of the fugitive. Some speculated that he had fled the country, others believed he was hiding with assistance from family or friends, and still others thought he had died by suicide in the vast Florida wilderness. On October 20th, 2021, the search came to its tragic conclusion. Chris and Roberta Laundrie, accompanied by law enforcement, went to the Carlton Reserve to search an area that had recently reopened after being underwater due to flooding. In the Miakahatchee Creek Environmental Park, adjacent to the Carlton Reserve, they found a backpack and notebook belonging to Brian Laundrie. Nearby, they discovered human remains that were later confirmed through dental records to be those of Brian Laundrie. The cause of Brian's death was determined to be a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. He had apparently died by suicide, taking with him any chance of getting answers about what exactly happened to Gabby in those final days in Wyoming. In January 2022, the FBI released a statement saying that Brian Laundrie was the only person responsible for Gabby's death, effectively closing the criminal investigation. However, this conclusion brought little comfort to Gabby's family, who were left with countless unanswered questions about their daughter's final days. The case of Gabby Petito and Brian Laundrie became more than just a true crime story. It sparked conversations about domestic violence, the dangers that can lurk behind social media's perfect facades, and the importance of recognizing warning signs in relationships. Gabby's family established the Gabby Petito Foundation to help other families facing similar situations and to raise awareness about domestic violence. Her legacy became one of helping others, even in death. As we conclude this story tonight, with the gentle rain continuing to fall, we remember Gabby Petito, not as a victim, but as a young woman who dreamed of adventure, who loved life, and who touched the hearts of millions around the world. Her story serves as a reminder that behind every missing person case is a family desperate for answers, and that sometimes the most dangerous place can be right beside someone you trust. The van life dream that began with such hope and excitement ended in tragedy in the wilderness of Wyoming. But Gabby's spirit lives on in the foundation that bears her name, in the awareness her story has raised, and in the hearts of all who remember her not for how she died, but for how she lived. Thank you for listening to tonight's true crime story. Rest peacefully, knowing that another story awaits you next time, ready to accompany you on another journey toward restorative sleep. But if you're still awake, don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss our next true crime stories. And until next time, stay safe and take care. Good night.